allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Very good. Could I get a motion to accept tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. And what's this? Item number 3.
Item number 3 is all about you folks and your great work, and a special thanks from so many different corners of the Irvington school community for all of your dedication and commitment throughout the school year. We know that it is a thankless position in many ways, but we respect you for your commitment and your dedication to making sure that we're able to provide the very best for all of our children in Irvington. And as is our custom, we have a number of special guests here this evening to honor and recognize the board. So with that said, I would like to invite our fine mayor, Mr. Smith, to come forward to the microphone.
Well, it is an honor and a pleasure to come here once a year and thank you guys. I think it's always wise, or you have wisdom when you know what you can't do, and I know one thing I could never do is be a school board member. Amount of technical knowledge and time, it makes the mayor job, the mayor job nothing in comparison. So you have my heartfelt thanks, as well as that of the larger village. As a parent and as mayor, I really thank you all for your selfless service. You guys get very little recognition, so I guess that's why they came up with the week for you guys. But it is an honor to be here. So I will read this proclamation because Larry works hard on it.
Oh, great.
I think it's the same template he's now reading.
Do we have these up on the wall somewhere?
We do.
Okay.
We do have them framed.
Yes, it's in the faculty men's room. Whereas each year, School Board Recognition Week is observed by more than 700 school boards and school districts throughout the Empire State. And whereas the men and women serving as members of the school board are dedicated to children, learning, and community, and devote many hours of service to elementary and secondary public education as they continually strive for improvement, excellence, and progress in education. And whereas the members of New York's local school boards respond to the educational needs of the communities they serve, and in doing so, these leaders help strengthen our state's educational system and improve future prospects for our children. And now, therefore, I, Brian C. Smith, serving as mayor of the Village of Irvington, do hereby proclaim October 22nd through 26th as School Board Recognition Week. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for all you do for us in the village.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you so much. 2 more.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you to the trustees for your partnership
Is this a real
and support.
Or was it stamped?
Wow.
Just check.
Now, there's fewer letters than there used to be, Brian.
So I always struggle with the order of who speaks next, so I'm just going to work around the room, and I'd like to invite Meredith and Christina from the IEF to come forward and say a few words as well.
So on behalf of the Irvington Education Foundation, we have a small token to show our appreciation. Your commitment to the children in our schools and to keep their best interests in mind are greatly appreciated. The time that you spend and the collaboration with the community and the district administration to help establish vision and to bring the programs into our school that are going to make us better as a school district is really very much appreciated. The time and the tireless efforts, and then trying to figure all that out in a fiscally responsible way is certainly not a very easy thing to do. So on behalf of the IEF, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Meredith.
I'm not sharing.
No, she will not do it.
You put Courtney's name on.
Thank you.
I did put Courtney's name on. Jonathan, would you like Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe. Probably at the end of the
Well, I just want to thank the IEF, a fantastic partner of the district, and last year got together with the Main Street School to put together an incredible new playground, which I haven't told you, but our next school board photo, I expect us to sort of pose on that structure together.
I'm going to go ahead.
Thank you.
Good, very good, and thank you. So next up, and following the theme of partnership, we have a PTSA. So Susan and Maggie, you mind coming forward?
Hi. Well, we do not have a proclamation like Mayor Smith, and it's always hard to follow up whatever he has to say. But we do, on behalf of the Irvington PTSA, want to thank each and every one of you for your time and your dedication. We have a small community, and it's nice to know you in and outside of this room, and it's nice to build relationships with all of you. And on behalf of all of our parents, we just want to say thank you. And Maggie is going to distribute what we have to give you tonight. And just to let you know, this is to let you know that we will always have you covered.
We'll always have you covered. That's good.
Good timing.
Thank you.
How did you know? I did not buy one, and I was going to, so that's awesome. Thank you so much.
So, always thinking of people's well-being and safety, whether it's security cameras or umbrellas.
Who's that?
It's better than great. So sweet.
And the PTSA is a great partner. It's our largest volunteer organization in the community, and they help in so many ways in our classrooms, working with our Parent Advisory Council as partners with principals, advocating for our district in terms of helping try and advocate for funding from Albany, which is always under the gun in terms of being stripped away. So they're really critical to the success of our district, so thank you.
Yeah, very good. So speaking of critical to our success,
Yes.
I would like to invite Amy Falk, the president of the Faculty Association, to come forward. And just as you referenced the largest volunteer group in Irvington, we have the largest group of employees in all of Irvington. So Amy, thank you for all the work the Faculty Association does on behalf of our children. And now's your chance to speak to the board.
Thank you. As has been said, you have a thankless job, but we're here to thank you. Nonetheless, everyone in this room, and certainly all of our members, are very grateful for all of the work that you put in to make this school district a functional institution. It's our livelihood, it's our work, it's our commitment to the community and to our students, and what you do, although sometimes behind the scenes, is very, very important for the work that we do. So we're very, very grateful for all of that. I have a modeling, actually, the gift that we have for all of you. It represents a donation that's been made in each of your names to our Making Strides walk, which is tomorrow. And now that you can be outfitted like all of us, hopefully you can come and join us at 3:20. And that invitation, of course, is open to everybody. This is a student-designed, student-produced shirt. And they've been working really hard to figure out ways to, get those donations. They were looking to surpass their $4,000 level that they reached last year. So thanks for the part that you did, even though it was kind of done for you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Thank you. Thank you, Mona. Thank you.
A great green gift bag, too.
Okay, shake your hand first. Thank you, David.
So very nice.
Of course. Amy, appreciate it. Deb. All right, thanks. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maria.
Chartreuse.
I'll find out and let you know.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very, very much, Amy.
And our Faculty Association, remarkable. Whether it's the personal experiences, I know when we have a chance to meet with teachers, it's always a powerful experience. At least it is for me to have that chance to understand the work that they're doing with our students. And then here in this environment, Raina and others, Jesse as well, help to share the foundational work that's going into supporting the work of the faculty. But to have over 1,700 kids going through here at any one time, and you're looking out for each and every one of them and making sure that their well-being is accounted for and that they're learning and prepared to go out there into the world, it's very much appreciated. So thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
Great. So going from the largest employee group in the district to about the smallest, I'd like to invite another critical partner, folks that put in tremendous time and energy and talent into their work every day, David Sotile, as president of the Administrators Association.
Thanks, Dr. Harrison. It's always, a great honor to speak to the board and to express our appreciation for all of the work. Going last is never the easiest part of that, but I will say that everything that's been said heretofore is true and much more. I think I've probably said here before, but I know I've said in other forums, when you volunteer to be a member of the Board of Education, no trip to the grocery store, no walk down your street, no community event or Little League game is ever the same again, and that's for certain. You give not only your time here at these meetings and in many other sessions, whether it's debating policy or working to come together with a budget to help improve our facilities, whatever it may be, it's all in support of one guiding mission, and that is the service of our young people in this community. And I think the fruits and the results of your work are evident each and every day when we think about the quality of our school system, the commitment that so many people show to it, the desire that we all feel to be here and be a part of it. And I want to say, on behalf of all of our administrators in the district, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. I do have a gift that comes from the IAA, and I thought a lot about this. It's not always so easy to figure out what it is that is going to be a fitting gift, so in honor of tonight's $1.6 billion lottery drawing, it occurred to me that perhaps a lottery ticket might be the way to go. But then I remembered I'm a member of the board's policy committee, and if that works out, it would be a violation of the gift policy. So instead, I thought about the last board meeting that I watched on video, and I said, oh yeah, coffee. So with that, I have a small gift card to Starbucks for each one of you on behalf of the IAA.
Thanks, David.
That's very sweet.
You should consult the legal opinion on it. I think it'll be okay.
Well, the odds that I'll use this are far higher than 1 in 314 million.
Yeah, got my fridge, man.
Thank you so much, David, and to our administrators. Every year you come and you share the work that is current in the schools. It's very passionate. It's very detailed, and it's been really a great experience over this last number of years to have those opportunities to have those deep and meaningful discussions. And I look forward to the ones that we have upcoming this year, which are always about how can we best serve our community, our students, our staff. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, David. And unfortunately, representatives of both of our CSEA bargaining groups, clerical and custodial units, could not be present today, but they also extend their appreciation and gratitude for all that you do for the school district. And then finally, on behalf of the school district, all of our faculty, staff, and children, we have a certificate for each of you for School Board Recognition Week for dedicated leadership in public education and continuing service to the children of this community. And then we also have a small gift. We'll follow the gift card theme for this evening as well.
Right.
So something for each.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, do you want to pass it down, or?
Oh,
You?
Very kind. It's like Christmas. Nice.
Very nice.
Thank you. And we even talked about this week, Mr. Mayor, but the district was in the news, not for necessarily the best of reasons, but there was a small fire in our custodian. We had a custodian that stepped up, and so not just are we looking after our facilities in a day-to-day or our students or making sure that our offices are functioning smoothly, but they're ready to step up. And I heard of another situation where somebody came to the aid of a student earlier this week as well. So there's so many ways in which our staff are looking out for our kids.
Yes, and to expand upon Mr. Hanna's remarks, as we know, the other day was a difficult moment here, an exciting moment, a nerve-wracking moment here in the campus when we had a small fire that occurred, electrical origin in nature with a shorted out extension cord. And certainly all of our staff sprung into action and did a phenomenal job to evacuate the building, to not only look out for one another, but of course our students. And in the midst of all of this, one of our wonderful members of our custodial team and our head custodian here at the high school, Rich Pittori, rather than exiting the building, grabbed the fire extinguisher and went towards the danger and extinguished what was a very small fire, but extinguished it and made sure that everyone was safe. I can tell you that we had the desire to invite Rich to be here tonight, and Rich doesn't like the attention, doesn't want all the applause, but he knows that we're acknowledging him this evening, and certainly we will acknowledge him in other ways throughout the year, because he was brave and did a great job in helping manage the situation. But when you look at any crisis like that, it comes down to the dedication of every single staff member. We have to extend thanks and gratitude to all of our students who were fantastic and cooperative. Everybody followed our routines and our drills, and it speaks to our levels of emergency readiness. And as I said in an email to Mayor Smith and others yesterday, that we couldn't do it all without the partnership of everybody in the village. And of course, we had our first responders, the fire department, police department here, ready to serve and make sure everyone was safe. So lots of accolades all the way around. And certainly to applaud another one of our staff members, we had one of our aides, Christine Stangarone, who happened to be on Main Street and when a child was choking, and came to the assistance of the mother, who was also providing the Heimlich maneuver to her child, and stayed with them until first responders came and cared for them. And so it speaks to, the heart and the soul of so many of the people here in our school district, and that level of dedication. That you see it throughout the school day, every single minute, every single period of the day, but that care and concern goes beyond the school bells. So certainly kudos and thanks to Christine for her support of one of our families during a very scary moment.
Yes, no, thank you. That's remarkable. And just to wrap it all up with a bow, I want to say thank you, Chris and Carol and Raina, for all that you do. We know that you work very, very hard and are very caring, and appreciate it. We appreciate it, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, what's next? We do have the opportunity for comments from members of the community. And we ask that if you'd like to step up and speak at the microphone at the back, that you would share your name and ideally keep your comments to approximately 3 minutes. Is there anyone who'd like to take the opportunity now? We'll have, also after the presentation, we usually allow some questions if people want to wait. But for those of you who, I know we have a great presentation coming up about instructional technology, and it's and the related Project Lead the Way. So we're going to jump into that, and those of you who want to make a quick exit, so be it. But do we have a comment? There we go.
Does the comment have to be on the agenda item?
I'll let you proceed there.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys for everything. I don't have a gift, but I thought maybe that you're going to get all your gifts today, and because it's Appreciation Week, that I would give you the gift at the end, so you wouldn't do that gift at the end. But I wanted to publicly state my displeasure at the public engagement aspect of the master schedule rollout. I've been following this since 9/11, 2017, when we had the presentations at the school, or I didn't get to go to the presentations, and neither did my wife. So we watched them, the videos of those, and we were eagerly awaiting follow-up engagement, which never happened. I was speaking with other parents, mostly 8th grade parents, because I have an 8th grader presently. And people I know were engaging the high school administration about setting up another meeting, another informational meeting involving the community. I looked at the cab notes from, the IMS cab notes from March of 2018, and there was a reference there asking Principal Cohen, well, what was going on, why was there not more information coming, and then there was a reference that David Sotai was going to ask Principal Cohen about that, and in the notes of the CAB meeting for March of 2018, it was addressed at the high school CAB meeting.
The high school PAC.
PAC meeting, CAB meeting, sorry, I apologize. High school PAC meeting, which you read the notes and Principal Cohen says, David reports that the scheduling committee has made great progress in the final stages of, and to be able to articulate to the community what the model will be implementing in 2019. This was a summation of what David Sotil told the committee, I guess. A lot of discussion with parents, students, and faculty have taken place, and the committee feels like they received valuable information from people who know how the high school operates. Once set, David will announce the date in May that he will hold an information session open to all community parents. So this is from March of 2018. I don't understand when the discussion with the parents happened. He mentions here that there was a discussion with parents. Now, I don't know when that happened. I was not aware of that. I pretty much pay attention to the school business. I always have. So that was a little concerning to me to find that on the VTSA website. And then obviously there was a meeting scheduled for May 3rd that was scheduled by Principal Cohen. Kind of abruptly, I assume, because it was scheduled for May 10th. The announcement of the meeting was on May 3rd, and the meeting itself was scheduled for May 10th. And that was abruptly canceled on May 7th. In an email to parents, and in that email, well, in the initial email on May 3rd, Principal Cohen says, in order for the changes to be most successful and to ensure the effective transition, it is important that we share the model and continue gathering input from all groups representing our school community. That meeting never happened. On May 7th, we received an email that there were several calendar conflicts had arisen that will require a change in date. I look forward to rescheduling this opportunity. In the near future, I will provide an update with a new date for the important event. Now, to me, that explanation sounds like the presentation is completely ready. There's just no time to have it, right? So fast forward to October of 2018, there is no meeting scheduled. So I question whether or not there was ever enough information put together for a meeting, because obviously it would have been scheduled. It should have been scheduled before the end of the school year. Because right now I emailed the district on October 17th, and there still was no meeting scheduled.
Right. So I mean, just to get to the gist here is that there hasn't been communication since the May letter, and
yes.
Is your question,
My question
when
is,
will it be communicated?
There's been no community engagement since September 11th of 2017.
In terms of an update or overview of the work?
Information.
Yes.
Except topical letters by Principal Cohen.
Yes.
So we're literally going from September 11th of 2017 to possibly December of 2018 with zero community engagement.
I understand.
Now,
So you're upset that there hasn't been communication in that time period, and you would like to know when communication will occur?
In poring over the new website, I'm looking for information about the subject, and there's zero information on the subject besides the fact that you mentioned it in a letter responding to members of the community in the communication sections of the Board of Education. I emailed Principal Cohen last Wednesday about this, and he said he would get on it. As of this morning, it's still not on there. So I'm busy like going back to my emails and forwarding this information to people in the community.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the school is not doing that at all.
Yes.
Now, I'm also going over the whole website looking for it. You know, it's not the most clear amount of information there. So I'm looking at the goals, district administration goals. I'm looking at the strategic plan from 2017, and I'm seeing that how highly the administration says that they hold community engagement. And I know, you know, we paid money for people to come in here and consult on this and to come up with a strategic plan. And to me, this is the single most important issue of my tenure here with my children. Both my children will be in high school in 2019. This is easily the most significant thing. The bond issues pale in comparison to this. And yet, like I said, there's been zero community engagement, and that's supposed to be a major, major part of the strategic plan of the administration going forward. So
All right, well, I can tell you that for the point of view of the board, message received, but I think you probably have a response, Dr. Harrison.
No, absolutely, and Mr. Oley, thank you for sharing your concerns and feedback. Like I say, from an administrative aspect, we certainly acknowledge the gap in communication. The community should expect a letter that will come forth from Mr. Cohen tomorrow related to the matter. We're going to be scheduling the appropriate follow-up presentation. And I don't want to make it seem as if there hasn't been important work that has been occurring. There's been a lot of important work behind the scenes with faculty and with the leadership team here at the high school. So we certainly acknowledge the gap in communication, and we are going to get it right back on track. There's, as I said, a letter that'll come forth tomorrow. There's going to be opportunities for a public presentation and engagement that I think is going to be very, very informative and provide opportunities for questions to be answered. And then there's also going to be layers of student engagement. So you'll see communications that will come out in two-part from Mr. Cohen. One, initiating some additional dialogue on the topic, sharing the resources that you've referenced, which are being put back up on the website. Admittedly, it was in the transition from the old website to the new website. Somehow they were dropped. So we are having that put back up on the website. And then follow-up communication is going to be specific details regarding the events that will be forthcoming, that will be designed for certainly engagement and education for everyone interested in the school community.
I just can't help looking at the chronology, though, is that if this is going to roll out in 2019, obviously the teachers need a lot of time to set up their lesson plans, change, and there's going to have a change in the kid lesson plan. So to me, if that's going to start in January, and we're going to have this discussion now, it seems to me like the decision has totally been made. So I don't understand how parent participation and discussion is going to affect the school's policy at all in terms of the master schedule. Like, to me, that the window has closed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you could please explain the rollout, because now I'm incredibly concerned about the ability of this administration, the high school administration, to roll out this program successfully, which means giving the teachers plenty of time to deal with what they have to do with their changes. I mean, they can make many changes in the last few years, and they need to make more. And are they going to have time to do this by September of 2019? That's incredibly concerning to me. And it seems to me like we've kind of lost that window. So it's not really a discussion. It's just going to be telling us what's happening now.
I think there's going to be opportunity for dialogue. There's going to be opportunity for Q&A. I can tell you that there are comprehensive plans in place that are looking at multiple facets of the entire process of moving to a new schedule. That there's components that are, of course, as you related to opportunities for professional development for teachers. There's a number of work groups that are being formed to work on a variety of different components of the schedule and the related process. And I believe that when Mr. Cohen and staff have the opportunity to present, I think it'll be reassuring in many ways to see the work and the plans that are in place. And it will be that opportunity for the community to learn more about the thinking of the staff here at the school. It's grown from some ideas of folks going from, as you saw in the presentation last year, attending a workshop and beginning to explore new ideas, to formulating a representative staff committee, to work in meetings at a faculty level, and now work in smaller groups to address a variety of different components related to the initiative. So, I certainly don't want to steal Mr. Cohen and staff's words, but I trust that the opportunity that's going to be announced in the next week is going to be informative, and it's going to provide opportunities for feedback. Certainly, there's a lot of work that's been done and a lot of things that are underway, but there's always opportunity for reflection. But I think that the event's going to be informative and will address a lot of concerns or questions that the community may have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Oley.
Jeez, you're
Della Lenz. I would just like to reiterate what Eric had said. And I feel over the time that we've been discussing the change in the master schedule, it's been more of a sales pitch to the community. I understand important work. The important work should include the stakeholders, the parents, the children, and we haven't been included at all. Posting of the meetings. I've asked, when are these meetings? And according to open meeting law, you can easily post those meeting schedules so that parents and community members can attend. Part of our strategic plan is having us be part of the decisions, us be part of the solutions, not being dictated, this will be done and we'll be able to answer any questions that you have. The lunchroom alone. I'm sorry, I've heard the same solution of kids eating on the floor since the first meeting that I attended. My kids will not eat on the floor. I barely like them eating on the cafeteria tables. It's disgusting, it's not appropriate, and to hear that come from administration, to even think that's remotely appropriate for a child to do, I would not let them eat on my floor, and mine's clean. Again, it's about community engagement and not being dictated what we do. And this is the school board's responsibility. The school board votes for a reason. You have the power to say yes or no. You could either say, go ahead, we turn over the reins and you do what you want, and we're the ones left holding the bag. This affects our children. This affects our property values. Less offerings. Children with IEPs are going to be affected. I have not heard one solution about that. I don't know when the meetings are, so I can't attend. What parents and children have been involved in this decision-making process? Not the sales pitch. What parents, students, community members have been part of the decision-making process? And at the board, I'm sure y'all have been involved. I assume that you've been attending these meetings? What board member has been attending these meetings?
Explain the committee structure.
Committee structure.
The administrators and teacher-led process.
I'm not sure of the point that you're looking at.
You know, basically, the committee is made up of David Cohen, Matt Samuelson, and a team of faculty. And so that's the committee that's been meeting and reviewing and doing site visits and a number of other activities. So there was the presentation last September. There was to be a presentation that did not occur in May. And as has been acknowledged, there's been a lag in getting back in front of the community. So
Yeah, and Della.
Well, I guess I go back to the strategic plan, because I understand the administration is making these decisions, but part of our strategic plan, like Eric said, we paid a lot of money, is to have shared decision-making. And it's also part of the New York State regulations. We must have shared decision-making. And I have not seen any actual participation, engagement beyond a sales pitch to the community. You know, there's no engagement. We had one teacher that, you know, a very well-loved, very excellent teacher that happened to not get tenure because she questioned the master schedule, you know, and I think that we're worth more. We pay a lot of money in taxes, and I'm making an assumption there, and that's wrong of me, and I apologize.
I do want to interrupt you right now because there are a number of statements that you're making that have no relationship to fact, and that's a problem.
Okay,
we understand,
so
and
we'll
I'm sorry, let me speak. We understand and acknowledge that there are issues with communication. You're acknowledging that, Dr. Harrison. It needs to be addressed, but it's not acceptable to make statements about personnel,
You're
about
right,
processes
and I
that you don't know
apologize.
about. So I just want to
Okay.
caution you on that.
So again, I go back to not the communication, you know, not the sales pitch, not the Q&A. Where is the shared decision-making? Where are we following our own strategic plan? Because I don't know any parents, students, community members that have been part of this process. What board members have been attending these meetings? You represent us. Where is the engagement from you? You're the ones that have to vote on this. This isn't administration's decision. This is your decision. This is the community's. It affects our kids. It affects our property values.
So Della, I appreciate the feedback and the concerns that you present, and this is not necessarily a subject that falls within the bounds of this shared decision-making plan. That is work that is related to the building site committees as defined within the plan. So that there's particular work that happens on that front. When we step back and we think of this work, we hear the question and hear the concern about the communication piece. There have been layers of student engagement. There were student focus groups. There were touch points as referenced with the PACs. Whether the minutes reflect all that occurred in those meetings, I cannot speak to that. We had the meetings that did occur in the fall, and we're going to have more conversation moving forward. What I do want to say is that we had a large number of educators, people that are credentialed professionals, experts, dig into this work. So when we look at this, it's not just looking at the thoughts of one administrator or a couple administrators. It's a body of work and a lot of people that have the best interests for our children at heart. So I can't acknowledge the communication lapse any more than I already have, and that's out there and that's owned, and we are addressing that, and there's going to be a communication coming forth tomorrow, and then a second communication that will follow shortly thereafter, outlining the dates of the events that will be coming up.
Well, I guess I would like to hear from the board.
I'm happy to speak to it, so
Yeah.
thank you. On behalf of the board, I want to say that we're very engaged in the different aspects of what occur in our district. We're not involved at every step in every process in the same way that other communities members.
This one's huge.
I'm sorry. I'm going to speak, please. I didn't interrupt you except for when you started to speak about things that were not factually correct. But the important piece to know is that we do have a relationship with Dr. Harrison and with our administrators, and that we are in communication. We've shared the types of concerns that have been shared tonight, and we've shared in terms of what our hopes and expectations are about the process. So that dialogue is occurring. We take it very seriously, and we know that we have a responsibility to the community and to our staff and to our children. So we are definitely engaged in the process, and I think to the rest, that's been addressed here in the last few minutes. So thank you.
Okay, I just want to say that I'm very disappointed with the engagement. I think that the board is essentially turning over the reins. It is your responsibility to represent us. It's your responsibility to engage us. It's your responsibility to be engaged. This is one of the most important decisions in our district, and we should have a say in it. We should be able to have dialogue, give input, work out problems. We've always had parents represented on these committees, and I don't even think that we have board members on these committees. Oh, share the meeting dates, see if people come. Engage with the community instead of just a sales pitch.
Thank you, Ms. Lentz. All right, would anybody else like to share a comment? Okay. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? I'm just going to use the restroom, and then we can start our presentation.
Okay. Can I trade?
We're trying to get members.
Why is it my favorite color? Oh, no, by no means. I thought it was an oddity. I'm a barn.
I'll check. Yeah,
No, give it to your husband.
yeah, I'll follow up with Donna on that. She manages.
Are you sure? Here's my red.
I don't know that we needed a first second, but thank you for the support. And we will now move on to what I expect to be a rich presentation discussion about instructional technology and Project Lead the Way.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Hanna. Tonight, Dr. Kaur and Mr. Lubinsky are pleased to give a very informative presentation that will be reflective of the great work that has taken place across the district over recent years. I can recall that, we go back 7 years ago where we were from a place of technology, and whether you want to look at it from an instructional lens, integration of technology, the number of devices, limited opportunities related to STEM or STEAM learning within our schools, to where we are today. And it's a story that a lot of the conversation has taken place in this room with the board, and has had the support of many different facets of our community. And that said, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Lubinsky and Dr. Kaur, who are going to talk about our work to this point and some future direction.
Sure. So, good evening. I'm going to actually just get us going, and then Jesse will probably take the larger chunk of our slides tonight, and I'll just, I don't know, add a little bit when I feel like there's maybe a little something extra that we could share.
You're going to add the color commentary?
Exactly. So, technology moving forward. We're excited tonight. You know, Jesse and I spend a lot of time talking about technology, Jesse more than me. But some of you may know, in my last life before coming to Irvington, this was my job in another school district. And so I am passionate about technology and the integration of technology in schools. And I think that Jesse and I have talked a few times about, it felt like for about 10 or 15 years, nothing really was moving very fast. And these last 5 years have just been warp speed. So we're excited, and we're excited to share some of the really good things that are going on, some of the wishes that we have, some of the infrastructure components, but really the vision and where we hope to see Irvington continue to grow in the area of technology. So tonight's areas of focus will be vision and goals, instructional, policies and compliance, and infrastructure. And one of the greatest challenges of talking about technology is it has this big umbrella called technology, and yet it really has so many components to it that in some ways are connected, but really require extensive attention in very discrete ways, and then they come back together. So tonight we're going to break it down, and then we're hoping that we're also going to be able to share examples of how these four things work together. As a district, I think we're all really proud of our overarching, our district objectives from our strategic planning process. And we love how this umbrella creates the frame for the work that we do in the buildings every day, our theories of action and our goals. And this is one area that we love how connected technology is to our goals and theories of action. As we go through the presentation tonight, there are going to be times when I hope you forget we're even talking about technology, and really what we're talking about is teaching and learning and thinking and all of the pieces. And technology is becoming a little bit of the pencil. So it's the vehicle at times, but we're always staying steeped in what are we talking about in our classrooms, what are kids doing, and what do we want students to know and be able to do. So with that, we frame this presentation the same way we frame all of our others, which is through our instructional goals, this idea of thinking about instructional practices and assessment. Because no matter what we're talking about, if we're talking about classrooms, those are the two key areas of focus. Those are our entry points. So in creating a vision, so I think when we first put this up, I think somebody might have said, where'd that vision come from? You know, I think it's not so much that we're creating a vision like everybody should think this. This was really just a function of where we see it. How do we see our work? And so, no, we didn't spend hours crafting this with, you know, a cast of thousands, and it's not that complex. It's fairly just a simple statement that grounds us in some of the work Jesse's going to be talking about tonight. So that all students should possess essential technology skills and participate in critical technology learning experiences that will equip them for success in our schools and prepare them for the challenges of their future. It's such a simple statement. I guess we could argue it. I guess we could refine it. We could craft it. But it almost doesn't seem like it's worth that much, because really the bang for our buck and the work is really in the coming slides around the goals and the work that we're doing at the building level, and how as a board and administration we're supporting the work of developing this idea of what we believe is important for students. So this framework for thinking about technology, if you look, the triangle in the background is the infrastructure. And the reality is we need the infrastructure. We need to have that in place if we're going to be able to talk and think and plan for the integration of classroom technology, a technology curriculum which is required by New York State, and the professional development that we believe is important if our teachers are going to be successful and our students are going to be engaging in high levels of work with technology as part of that picture. So this framework is, it's simple, and yet what's inside it is obviously incredibly complex. So I'm going to turn this over to Jesse. He's going to take you through a part of the journey that we've been on and also where we see ourselves going as a school district.
Thank you. Thanks again for the opportunity to be in front of everyone tonight. As Dave said, I clear a room. I think it's important to just take a step back, especially since many of you weren't on the board when we initially developed the technology plan in 2014, just to give you a little brief history lesson on kind of how we got to where we are now. I think Raina mentioned a really important time point, which was that 2013-2014 school year when we started with the development of the new plan. Prior to that, I think many school districts were struggling with technology plans in general because districts were trying to create long-term technology plans, which oftentimes by the time they were in year 2, year 3, year 4, those plans were already outdated because technology changes very quickly. So our goals going into this last technology plan cycle was to give us the opportunity to create a long-term vision for technology in the district, recognizing that there were going to be changes in the industry, in schools, how schools approach technology, but to give us that flexibility to pivot as we moved along. So we, in general, whenever you're looking at a plan, sometimes you're starting with an old plan to work off of, but we didn't have that luxury when we went in the cycle, and I remember sitting with Dr. Harrison and Dr. Korb for days looking through technology plans and trying to find a model that we thought would work. And what we did was obviously take some of those things that we thought really connected with what we were trying to do in the district, and over the period of a week-ish, we held a technology summit where we fleshed out these 7 goals with, I think it was around 100 teachers from throughout the district who selected the areas that were of interest to them or areas that they felt strongly that they wanted to help us develop, and with their assistance, we were able to really flesh out, and you'll see a little bit of what that work looked like and how we anticipate that work moving forward. But you can see that where we wound up in that plan was with 7 overarching goals. I think one thing that we're particularly proud of now looking back is you'll see as we start to show you some of the alignment with industry, I'm going to say industry, but goals through some professional organizations. Their goals have evolved to actually align closer to the goals that we identified prior to their alignment. So in that sense, we felt really good now at this point in time, looking back and starting to say, okay, well, where do we go from here? We're in a good place in that we're already aligned with a lot of the goal structures of what other organizations have already come forward with for schools and education in general. So you could see, I'm going to take you through each of the 7 goals briefly, and I'll start with goal 1 in that, actually before I do that, I think it's important to understand that when you have this technology plan in place, how do we ensure that the work of the plan happens, right? And it happens with the partnerships that we're able to create at the buildings and throughout the district. So part of our structure is that we have building technology committees that operate through, over the course of the year, and each year we take a look at the plan with fresh eyes and really identify what are the goal focus areas that we want to work on for a particular year. So obviously we believe work happens in all 7 of these areas at each building, but really there's only so much time on top of all the initiatives we have to really make sure that we're moving forward on one area. So can we pick a focus area, and what are our objectives and goals for that year, and move forward with that? So here I just tried to give you a glimpse into, over the course of the 4 years of that plan, what were some of the areas we focused on in each building, what were some of the work product that happened as a result of that. So you could see at Dow's Lane, and you could see the goals varied from building to building. So you'll notice that in Main Street School, they focused on goal 7, and that was actually a major area of focus each year, whereas other buildings didn't focus on that as much because they had specific initiatives that aligned with that goal. That didn't mean that work wasn't happening in the other buildings. It just meant as a particular focus area, we were able to produce some really nice results toward that goal 7, which was global education and citizenship. At Dow's Lane, you can see some of the work that we've done at Dow's involved. Dow's was very technology, I don't want to say technology poor, but did not really have some of the technology that we had up at, weird word to use, sorry, up at the high school. And really what we wanted to spend time focusing on at Dow's was looking at what other schools do, because, I mean, elementary, more than any other grade level or school in most districts, there isn't really a lot of alignment between what one district does and what others do. They really put their own unique stamp on it. So we actually created site committees to go out to, within Dowslein, to go out and visit other districts. We visited Ardsley, Scarsdale, Bronxville, to look at their systems, come back, and then start to map out what do we envision. And what we wound up with was something that didn't really look like any of them individually, but that took some of those best components of what we saw when we went and did those visits. Genius Hour is another initiative that started in a classroom and then became something that we connected to through the work as an entire building, and that became a focus of the work of the Building Technology Committee. And I should actually add that the Building Technology Committee at, I'm using the term Building Technology Committee, but in Dowslein it's actually called the Innovation Committee. So while we discuss technology there, Genius Hour is not a technology initiative, it's really an initiative around teaching and learning, as Raina said. So we've really been trying to break down these barriers of the fact that this is all about technology, because I think that undersells it, quite frankly. Similarly with the middle school and high school, you could see their goals align with the work that was happening in their buildings. And in those buildings, as you know, over the past few years, there's been a large increase in the number of devices, and really how do they use those devices? So you'll see, we're going to show you a glimpse of our infrastructure numbers, how those have shifted over the past few years in terms of the last time we did this presentation in 2015, from the number of desktop devices now to the number of mobile devices, and you're going to see huge shifts across the board. And that actually correlates to improvements we've been able to see in teaching and learning because of the ability to flexibly think and create spaces that are optimized for particular learning experiences for students. Now, one thing I did add, I had all 4 buildings here, but I wanted to note, we've also been partnering with PPS through the lens of our technology plan, because there's a huge need for assistive technology and recognizing the needs of those students who require or who have needs that are specific to them. And so we've actually formed an assistive technology committee and developing a plan and goals specifically targeted around that. Now, what we've done is for each of the goals, we just wanted to have one framing statement up at the top. So, Jean, do you want me to read that, or do you? I don't know for the listeners at home. Okay, so that framing statement was really just so that you could see, because if you look at the plan itself, and I'm sure you guys are all well versed in our technology plan, but it's like 40-something pages long. So each goal is like 7 or 8 pages. We didn't want to have to go through the whole goal, but we felt like having a framing statement here would let you see, as we talk about the work on the next slide, can kind of give you a connection to what our thinking was around how that work connects back to this goal. So mobile student-centered computing is that work around, I guess, and mobile could have been interchangeable with the word flexible, right? Flexible learning environments. So what I did up at this top portion is really talk about, well, what are the different models that we can use? And I mentioned Chromebooks, but this can apply to any mobile device, because we do have iPads and other devices as well. So how does having those devices impact classroom instruction, and specifically planning to have newer opportunities for students that we couldn't have under our older models? And so what I did for each of those bullets was not focus so much on giving you like, this teacher does this. What I really wanted you to see was kind of the grouping strategies that are in play here. So, in a one-to-one model, the students obviously each have access to a device. Now, we are not one-to-one in any particular grade or building. The way we've structured our Chromebook purchases, and I'm sure you remember this from our budget conversations over the past few years, is that classrooms, departments, grade levels, what we've done is purchase through tubs. So each of these mobile tubs holds 5 Chromebook devices, with the idea that, a teacher is probably not using these devices at all times, and teachers can work to acquire whatever devices they need for whatever the instructional focus is. So some lessons are designed to actually have students working in pairs. In that case, in a 20-person class, they would have to obtain another bucket, and that gives them, or tub, and that would give them 10 devices for students to be able to work in pairs. Now, for example, at the secondary level, we do have carts in each building, in addition to the tubs that are available per classroom or per department. That allows a teacher to actually reserve an entire cart ahead of time and know that they could plan their lesson around having one-to-one devices for their students. Now, I mentioned small groups as well, because I think it's important to note that, well, what does a teacher do if they have only that one tub? They could still plan, and many teachers do, plan around having groups of students use a device. So for instance, if you think about the old setup where we would have students recording, they can collaborate and still work off of one device per group, as opposed to having 2 or 3 devices, they could still plan around having that number. So it's been flexible in the sense of they can obtain the number of devices they need given whatever the instructional goals are for a particular outcome. In addition, I mentioned here devices used in classroom within flexible spaces. Now, flexible spaces are also something we talk about under the innovation goal, and you're going to see there's a lot of, even as we start to talk about different types of software, there's no discrete buckets here. Things fit under multiple places, so it's important to realize, we don't view things as living under one goal. This is really just our goals, but there are things that live across each of these different goal areas. Having these devices paired up with the flexible spaces actually allows for accommodating those learning needs even more. Because now furniture isn't a limitation, and actually we're able to craft those lessons to actually maximize student engagement, whatever the instructional goals are, that can actually be accommodated based on the room itself, not just the technology.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. So for instance, and I'm just trying to think which one I want to use. So in our PLTW room, C203, we do multiple classes in that room. We are able to manipulate that furniture to actually create the grouping. So if we do need to do, unlike having like a square, these are actually designed to be able to fit together in multiple ways so that we can create the groupings we need. Now that's just one surface example of that, but you get the sense. Now, goal 2, and I should actually, this might be a good point to mention. So we're going to talk a little bit more toward the end of the presentation about where we're going from here. I think you're going to notice, and I think you might have already noticed by the goals that buildings chose to work on, some were selected more than others because some require a different level of thought than others in the sense that this goal, interactive multimedia capable peripherals, when we came up with this, or developed the goal, we were really thinking about the devices needed to support teaching and learning. Now, if you think about that in the context of the work that we do, that's exactly what those are. Those devices support, I'm not sure we would necessarily call that a goal. So as we start to look at the plan moving forward, what we're doing is taking a look at these goals now and saying, okay, which are the goals we actually work on as really like impacting teaching and learning, and which support that work? So as you see here, when we talk about the things that exist under goal 2, that's what we're talking about. We're talking, in my mind, about 2 things: the devices themselves, right? So when we talk about that first goal, we're really talking about how we utilize these devices that we're really looking at in goal 2. And so some of the buildings that have explored work around goal 2 are really trying to figure out what devices make the most sense. So where we're still continuing that work is at the grades K and 1, where we've been piloting multiple types of devices to see what would work. Because, and we talked about this through the Smart Schools process, did it make sense because we were using Chromebooks at the higher grades to then continue to push that down? Or because we know that kindergarten and first grade, obviously they're not typing full sentences, what is the optimal device? So we've been piloting touchscreen Chromebooks as well as iPads in an attempt to work with the teachers to ascertain, as we make purchasing decisions moving forward, what makes the most sense, both from the teacher's perspective in terms of what's easiest for them to plan with, as well as what's easiest for students to be able to use and work with in those lessons. Then the peripherals. So we would call peripherals, we defined it here as resources that support learning for all students in our schools. You can see here those are things like printers, scanners, document cameras, not something that we would necessarily say we design our lessons around using these devices, but really the things that support that work. So document cameras in particular, I would say that is the most, to someone who's not in the classroom, would have the least understanding of what they're doing with it, but it's kind of like those old ELMO systems you might have seen in a college lecture hall, except really, this has actually impacted teachers' abilities to be able to show something on the screen but at the front of the room without needing to make copies or not even have physical paper, but even for lab purposes, being able to demonstrate something while still having students sitting in their seats. And every classroom is equipped with a document camera. So that was an initiative I want to say we did 4 or 5 years ago, and actually one that's paid off handsomely because I think teachers really, I mean, we know this because of how often we have to repair these things, but really make use of these. They use it every day. Then you start to have those future-looking peripherals, right? Things we might not necessarily know about now, but that are kind of on the radar. And I put VR here. You could think of it as VR or AR. The Google Expeditions, which we received as a result of the IEF support, the grant. This was not for this year, for last year, and that was actually for the middle school. So if you're familiar with what Google Cardboard is, essentially it allows for virtual field trips or augmented reality now, which was an addition last year, So for instance, in a science lab, if I wanted to explore DNA, I could actually have the helix in 3D where I would hold, or in AR, where I can hold that device out and see it and explore it in three-dimensional space. So it's actually, we're continuing to work on our, because with newer technologies where teachers are not as familiar, there's more of a, yes, it's great that we have it, but teachers still need that support to understand how they can incorporate that into their instructional design. So that's still an initiative for us to keep pushing forward, but the teachers that have kind of embraced it have really said that there's been extraordinary benefits in their classrooms. Goal 3, PD, and you know, it's funny because it's listed here as a goal, but as you saw, it was also something that we believe was at the bedrock of the work we do around technology. Big statement up there around PD, but I'm sure you're familiar with it. I want to just touch on quickly what some of the things are that we do with PD. Up there. So PD happens in a bunch of different ways. Now we obviously don't have a full-time, technology staff developer, so we've been creative around how we do some of this training. In terms of PD that's available for all staff, Google PD is its own thing because G Suite is really not just a productivity tool, but so not just something that teachers use for like posting their assignments, but they're using it to actually develop their instructional resources. So we know that that support's needed both on the productivity level as well as the instructional level. And we've been trying to support both of those. So what we found is over the past few years that we've had this initiative in place is that there's been a progression of the types of requests that teachers have had for requiring support. So it started out as like kind of a, how do I do this? What do I click on? Those type of questions to really, okay, so now how do I create a resource that would allow students to do this? And really start to go from a productivity type resource question to really an instructional question, which was, I think, our hope in the beginning. And we've gradually started to support that work over time. So I meet with our team monthly to kind of provide them with PD so that they can go back out and continue to support the work at the building level. Now, we've also then provided PD for specific initiatives, either building-wide or district-wide. So the SAMR model was actually something that I worked with each building on last year, and that was really in support of the work we were already doing with the professional development plan. So the SAMR model is really a quick way for teachers to understand how they incorporate technology into the classroom, because I think one thing we find, and this is an age-old problem, I think, is that when teachers, sometimes if you were to start to hammer down into the why they're using it, the answer starts to get nebulous. Either sometimes technology connects with a teacher because they see something cool that they could do with their kids, but they're not necessarily asking them the really important questions about why they're integrating that into their instruction. And so the SAMR model was just a very quick way for teachers to be able to, and SAMR is in acronym.
It's substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition.
Correct. So think about substitution. So think about substitution as, instead of writing something, I would use a Google Doc to type it, right? You're not actually changing the way you're teaching. You're just simply substituting out what you would do normally for a technology tool. And I'm not going to go through all four, but now when you think about redefinition, you're now saying, I'm using technology in a way that I could not possibly have done this before I had that. And so by doing this work with each building and getting the teachers to really think about it, we've actually found a common language to be able to really discuss technology in a meaningful way with them and have them reflect on how and why they're actually building technology into their lesson. Then we've had those specific instructional initiatives. So I already talked about expeditions and doing that. Google Hangouts has been another one. So that connects back to like our global goal, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But what resources do we have that allow us to connect out to other educators around the globe, whether it's other classrooms, guest speakers, things like that, and kind of expand the walls of our classrooms? Assessment's one that I was the focus of my work with the middle school last year. So how do we use tools for digital assessment? And so I listed a few that we did here. And so different types of assessment, and I apologize because I also include this on another slide. But for instance, how do I do anything from quick exit tickets to rubric-based digital grading to basically improve the way I can communicate with my students, but also inform my thinking for lesson design and let my students know before they even leave for the day where they are in a particular lesson. So rather than waiting for like the quiz or the test to find out, oh wow, I needed intervention, to find out earlier than that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Now the masterclass workshops have actually been pretty exciting for us. So This started last summer, so summer 2017. Summer 2017, we actually had 3 authors come to the district over the summer. The authors of the Google Infused Classroom, Dive into Inquiry, and Hyperdocs. And Hyperdocs are essentially a way of using a Google document for in an inquiry-based setting. And we had those authors come here and do a one-day workshop around the contents of their books, and then actually had continued workshops throughout the course of the year with those attendees, with the author connecting with us in terms of integrating that work into their unit planners. So the nice piece about this is, as you start to look at it, even though the word Google's there and even though like Hyperdocs are there, this work was really about like teaching and teaching and learning and thinking, and how they were actually designing their instructions around the integration of these tools. So it wasn't technology for technology's sake, it was really about how do we improve instruction through the use of those tools. This summer, we held another workshop called the Student Voice Infused Classroom. And this is something I'll talk a little bit about when we get to the innovation slide, but really about how do we find opportunities to increase student voice through the work we do. And what's interesting, and the reason why it was kind of a build on from the last summer's work, is in some cases it did involve the same tools, but the conversations were very different because now there was a different focus. It was about how do we find opportunities to really engage students where they are in instruction and give them some voice and choice over the work that they do. Now, PLTW training is on here because, as you know, we've expanded the work we do around Project Lead the Way and STEM, and I think it's important to note that those teachers commit to a pretty rigorous training schedule, in some cases giving up 2 weeks over the summer for them to be grounded in the work in order to be able to be certified to do that Project Lead the Way work. So I want to say this summer we added 3. So we added the launch, which was the K2, and then 2 electives at the middle school, which we'll be talking about. But all of those require teachers to go out for substantial training in order for them to be able to go and offer those courses. Now, I've always struggled with that word electronic. My guess is that word will be there next time. But when we talk about electronic resources, we're talking about what are the resources that teachers need to support teaching and learning in their classroom. I think the reason electronics I always think of electronic as like circuits and like the little football game with the red dots. I like the word digital resources, but I think you'll see, mostly because as you see on the next slide, a lot of the resources we're talking about are digital resources. So what we've done, and you're going to kind of see this as we move forward even into curriculum integration, is we try to break these down into categories, although like I said, some of these live across multiple categories, and some of these names may not mean anything to you, but one thing I will say is I made sure to include components of G Suite for Education in each of these, because I want you to understand how that is really at the foundation of the work we do across all areas. Not just, I think from the parents' perspective at home, they know about Google Classroom because that's where everything is kind of coming to them from. But all the work that's happening really happens through Classroom as a result of the work they're able to do in all the other tools available to them through that suite. But that's not the only thing we offer. So you could see that obviously part of having a smartboard in class is having an understanding of the Smart Notebook suite, which allows them to then optimize their instruction using that tool in their classroom. And then we have other tools listed in each category. Right? You don't want to go through each tool and talk about it.
I can't imagine
Okay.
you to go through each tool, but
How much time do you
yes,
have? No.
Yeah.
That's right.
I
So,
guess they could ask questions.
I mean, I will say that, one example that I think of, Flipgrid is a tool that really caught on as a result of the masterclass workshop we did in 2017. It's cool. It's actually cool that a couple of these things that are on here were as a result of the work we did, and teachers really clamoring for like, okay, we're ready to go. We want to be able to use this tool in our instruction. And Raina and I were there, and it was really great to hear the why they were wanting to use it, where I think a few years ago it would have been like, oh, that looks really cool. We'd love to use this in our classroom, to, oh, this will allow us to be able to do X, Y, Z, which directly mapped out to work that they had already started outlining in their unit planner. So there was a real direct connection to now technology requests to the specific function and also what they've already been working on over the course of several years in developing those unit planners and lessons.
Can I just add one
Sure.
thing there? And I think sort of maybe a testimony to sort of how connected we are. So Jessie brought in one of the authors who did the work, and then she returned to do the master class over the summer. She's actually coming back in November to sit in on a teaching thinking day, because she's just as interested in learning about our work as we're interested in learning about her work. And I don't think there's like a better example of what this could look like moving forward in terms of resources and us being valuable to her and her being valuable to us.
I'll actually add, there was one comment I think that we were particularly proud of in that, so she, over the summer, as she was kind of working with each group and going from table to table, she came up to Rain and I afterwards and she was like, I need you to know that I'm in districts all over the world and there are no teachers that have conversations like the ones that yours are having. So that made us feel really good. We're like, oh, cool. It's been worth it, right? All the work to get us to where we are has made a difference because there really aren't teachers having conversations about that deep level of thinking and integration of technology, at other schools. And I think that was partially why she wanted to come back to do the teaching thinking, because to really see what that next level is.
Just which author was that?
Holly Clark, she's the author of the Google Infused Classroom.
Thank you.
So goal 5, this one's more than one slide because obviously this is where, right, the meat of the work happens is in the curriculum integration, because what's the value of technology if we're not finding meaningful ways to integrate this into our instruction? So we just wanted to highlight again, here we have the diagram. We already talked about how professional development is part of that bedrock. I think it's also important I think one of my earlier, I don't want to say frustrations, but one of the things I often noticed, the conversations I would have, is there was always confusion between technology curriculum and integration of technology, because I think, we're really strong in some areas, but there are areas where, we'll talk about where, yes, we have Project Lead the Way. Project Lead the Way is a STEM curriculum. We talk about where do we teach technology. That's an area where we really need to have some discussion, because it's more than just how we integrate technology into the existing areas, math, science, and the other subjects. It's really about also where do we teach some of those things about how students really need to use technology or should be using technology. So you can see here, those are the same categories when we talk about instructional, through that lens of the instructional goals. Really, I have it broken out to that productivity, collaboration, assessment in terms of what we view when we're looking at technology. Usually they're falling into those categories. And then the curriculum is more of that, what is the formal technology curriculum that we use here in Irvington? So PLTW, Project Lead the Way, is our STEM-based curriculum. We've talked about that at many board meetings before, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes. I'm going to skip around a second, go right to computer science. So computer science is really, when we talk about technology courses at the high school, really what we're talking about is the computer science curriculum, and we're going to break down what courses make that up in a few minutes. And then we have, I don't know if you want to talk about Amplify briefly?
Sure, well, yeah, I can. I mean, I think we just talked about it
Right.
recently, so I would say here the link for Amplify is one of the things that we're excited about. Is Amplify has a pretty strong online component at all the grade levels, but specifically at the middle school level. So Amplify has built their middle level curriculum around the expectation of a one-to-one model. So that doesn't mean one-to-one that every kid has to be walking around with their own computer all day long, but what it means is that when the class arrives in the classroom, there's an expectation that every student could be working on their own device. And so there are very few curriculums that are actually built that way. A lot of the examples Jesse shared with you, like Castle Learning, those are, I don't know, how would you describe?
Sometimes
they're
they're done in
accessible.
pocket. So
Right.
we talked about those different grouping models that teachers could use in their class. That's Castle Learning, something that could be done as part of a grouping model. So I've seen that where a set of students are working on an assessment through Castle Learning while others are working directly with a teacher. While there's a lot of ways to structure it, but in the case of Amplify, the expectation is
It's all there. So kids have to access the online component of it. And so we're excited because
Right.
not only are we sort of testing out Amplify a little bit, we're actually exploring really what I think we see as of the future, like in many, many ways. And so having a chance to see, is this, what do we learn from this? What can we figure out? What questions do we have? What does it tell us about the technology access we have at the middle school? So many different questions that have been stirring around since the development of this plan, really. And so in order for us to expand, this gave us a chance to pilot something that's going to be able to not only inform science, but actually inform practices in our classroom. And to do it in such a small pocket way, we believe is a really valuable way to start something like this. You don't want to go in, hook, line, and sinker. So, so Amplify, it just gives us another entry point of how we're exploring technology and the infrastructure in Irvington.
And we had one other bullet here for standards-based instruction. You know, I just wanted to, again, come back to, I feel like every few years we just talk about this point and everyone's like, really? And we're like, yeah, let's just to state it. The only requirement we have around technology from New York State around what technology instruction needs to be given in students is that students have to have technology at the middle school level. But beside that, there's no real, there's no requirement at the elementary level or requirement at the high school level for students to have technology. Whatever districts are giving to students is because it's at the core of what they believe and what their plan calls for. So I think that's just important to highlight that. So just again, what I wanted to do was highlight some of those examples of in each of those different pockets, the productivity, collaboration, assessment, how that's being integrated in instruction. So I already talked through, actually, I kind of hit on each of these a little bit, but I'll talk about collaboration for a second because I'm not sure I really hit on that. In productivity, you know, that's where we're really talking about using digital resources for the purpose of a variety of different classroom uses, but this is where I would kind of categorize Google Classroom for how it's being used in our district. It's not really for the purposes of delivering instruction, but more for organizing classroom resources, ensuring that you know both students and parents are informed, resources are organized and accessible, but also content creation. So students at Dowsley using Book Creator, which is another tool that kind of came out of the student voice infused classroom, to allow them to write and publish stories. Things like that I would categorize as productivity. Now collaboration, there's a bunch of different ways that we see that, both with devices and software specific. Flipgrid, I mentioned before as a resource, but to give you a sense of what that is, Flipgrid is essentially a site which we were subscribing to. Microsoft just purchased it and essentially waived the fee for it, and now it's something we actually received a refund on our purchase of it. But it allows students to record and present work with peers and then provide feedback. So for instance, we've used it in a variety of different ways. One way is you could actually have it used for reflection. So at Main Street, one nice way that we've seen it used is students can actually, after a math lesson, for instance, go and explain the concept on a video, which then students can watch each other's and then respond either with, just, the like, or a thumbs up, or actually respond with a video and say, I really like the explanation. One thing I would add is, and so forth. We've had students actually deliver, do poetry readings using that. In some cases, we've actually just used it as a resource to be able to collect, check-in information. So for instance, I use it with the Innovation Fund students to really just get a sense of, okay, where are we this month? And rather than have to, round up everybody for a meeting, they're able to, on their phone, just do a quick video check-in, and students are able to comment on each other's resources. So very simple to use, and it makes collaboration really easy. Under assessment, really quick, I'll just kind of go through that example I talked about where in the middle school I was doing work around digital assessment using Google Forms. I remember when I was, amazing I can remember this far back. I remember when I was teaching, and I had a mentor teacher who told me I should actually give index cards to my students as they were leaving class, give 3 problems, collect those, and then I should go through the stack of index cards, and I would get a sense of whether or not the class understood the lesson. And what I realized was that my desk could hold lots of stacks of index cards because I never had a chance to go through those index cards, but I knew the value of that data. But the problem was I didn't want to know at the end of the day. I needed to know, like in between periods 1 and 2, whether or not I needed to make a change to my lesson, right? Because the worst thing you can feel as a teacher is you ended the day, realized no one understood what you did, and then you're spending a day to go back and redo everything. So what we worked on developing were exit tickets that can be given out at the end of class quickly. Students can very quickly on the device, find out how they did and know whether or not they needed to seek extra help. But also the teacher would have that data immediately before the next class would walk in and could make adjustments to their instruction pretty much on the fly. So having that immediately, that immediate just-in-time data was really valuable as we started to see teachers using that in instruction. So one thing I did want to highlight quickly is just to show, so we have made a big shift in terms of how we use technology in the district. What impact has that had over the past several years? So the last time we did this presentation was in fall 2015, I believe. So we took a look at data that we collected for fall 2015 versus data collected in fall 2017, and we're actually in the process of doing our fall 2018 collection now. And what we actually saw was, just to kind of give the snapshots of the numbers I'd like you to kind of walk away with, is from what we saw on a weekly basis, or at least daily or weekly, teachers are reporting that they were using technology and instruction that was up from 49% to 70%. And from student-reported computer use and instruction, that number went up from 68% to 90%. So that was over a 2-year period, and I want to add that that was actually before we brought in last year's cycle of devices, which was the big cycle that we had budgeted for. So our anticipation is, as we start to look at that data now, that that's more. Now, I want to actually just quickly hone in on what this actually is. So this isn't availability of devices. This is actually utilizing those devices in instruction. So that's a big shift over a 2-year period. So with the anticipation that we continue to see that number moving up.
Jesse, can I just, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Just because you spent some time on the slides. I don't understand how you got the information. Just give me a little bit of background.
The data?
Yeah, like who
sure.
did you survey? How did you get it? Which teachers? I mean, what's the pool? Just so if it has value, I don't have a perspective.
For these 2 slides?
Yeah.
Sure. So part of the Smart Schools Bond Act was that districts were required to collect data twice a year to kind of inform their thinking moving forward. So we discussed a variety of different ways we could do that, and we realized that what we really wanted to do was start collecting longitudinal data over time. So it wasn't valuable necessarily for us to collect our own, to develop an instrument and then start to have to worry about revising that. A company called Bright Bytes has a product called Clarity, which we actually have access to as a result of our connection to Lyric, local Lower Hudson Regional Information Center. So that survey stays consistent over time. So essentially we issue that survey twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring, and then we've been doing that. So we're entering our 4th year of data collection. So we're actually doing right now our 7th cycle of data collection. So we've been able to now, so we can actually go in now and start to see, well, what does that data look like from fall 2015 through now? So, and we actually, I just went to a workshop last week actually where we met with Bright Bytes to discuss ways that we could, make even greater use of that data, because I think when we first did that data collection, you have, a snapshot from a point in time. To us, the value was always going to be in once we started to have that data over multiple years, how does that then look, that longitudinal data look over time? So that's really what we're starting to unpack now is now that we have all this great data, how do we actually utilize this to inform our decision making over time?
Right. And these are all teachers who surveyed? No.
Well, so all teachers were given the survey. I guess what I would say is Clarity actually has measurements by building, depending on the number of students and the number of teachers, for what it would consider statistically significant data collection.
To be clear, they were not mandated to complete the survey?
Yeah. Well,
data collection methodology?
Well, wait. So we ask all teachers to do it, but there's no way to track in the system because it won't give us the names. It's data collection. So what I did was I put a survey in front of this to get the name, so I have a rough sense of who does it, but there's no way to actually confirm. So our goal has been to ensure, I will say this, so our goal has been to ensure, because they have a barometer where they're like, your data is statistically significant if you reach this many respondents from both the teacher, the student, and the parent category. Those numbers differ for each category, for each building. We have not just tried to hit that, we have tried to go far beyond that, and I think in all of our data collections, our number of respondents has well exceeded that category, so we feel very confident that the data we've been collecting does accurately reflect the views of any given point in time.
And we're happy to share additional, I have to tell you, we had a long conversation, there were some more slides in here. This is a presentation unto itself.
Right.
And I think what we tried to do was actually start to say, what data do we have and what data support the conversation, the work we're doing. And so we purposely pull these because I think it's really the evidence to say, we've done all this work around instruction and integration. So what's our evidence, right? What's our data that says that something has changed? And so we purposely used this data because it was really relevant. Again, we have other data, we're happy to share it, but we also know that this could become a rabbit hole, and I think for tonight's presentation, we really wanted to make sure that we were getting to the goals and to that work, but it's interesting for sure. So I'll give that back to
So I
you.
guess, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Every collection we've done for the 6 collections, we've well exceeded statistically significant in all of our categories. And I believe you guys should be getting the parent survey for this round too,
Yeah.
so please chime in.
Hopefully you've all done this every time.
Well, you know, certainly,
Sure.
That's something to think about. I mean, for us, it's interesting to see this data. I know the first year or two, it's like, why are we doing clarity? And it's
Right.
100% clear. So, to the degree that, you know, for the board, this is great, and then if there's ways in which it can, there's pieces that can be public facing so they can see it.
Absolutely.
So
No,
this is,
did you do the student already? I'm sorry. Oh, you did both, teacher
Yeah, I
and
did
student. Oh, I don't know. Because there
yeah.
were no questions about student, I guess.
Any questions about student
No.
data?
That's-
I think I'll answer one question that people might
I
have.
do, actually.
Oh, sure.
Well, I could ask, I was gonna ask it later, but since we're here, it's a very simple question.
Sure.
I just don't understand how
Why the,
32% of students almost use tech computers in instruction daily, but teachers rather, but 66% of students use it for instruction daily.
so there's a couple of reasons. So we've asked the same question, and there's some obvious answers. Your teacher and your student data set doesn't match up one-to-one. I think another important thing for you to know is teachers K-12 are surveyed, students 3-12 are surveyed. So they won't allow us to issue the survey below grade 3. So your student and your teacher pools don't match up exactly. So you're never going to get a perfect match. So for us, the correlation was, okay, there's an increase in both of those uses. We know that that's consistent with what we think should be happening. So the fact that it wasn't lining up one-to-one didn't really concern us, because we knew we were looking at different.
Two different data
Yeah,
sets.
exactly.
I mean, you could have 100% participation from students if they have one teacher using it and the other 5
That's
don't.
right.
Yeah, the secondary.
Right.
One thing I'll add, and this is just important as you start to think through the administration of it, and it's similar to just general survey methodologies in general, is to the person who's taking the survey, there's a certain amount of interpretation they have to do on their own for understanding what a question is asking. So, you know, that's one question we often get during these cycles, and we're like, you have to make your best, guess at interpreting it. So, we realize that that's where there's always going to be those little gradients where it doesn't come out quite right. But when both data sets are telling us the same thing, we feel confident, So this now moves us over to kind of talking about STEM education. And I know we've talked about PLT before. We don't want to, kind of hammer that home. But I think the one thing I do want to just keep talking about with PLTW that I think is important to highlight is, and we've even had this great conversation around, when we talk about PLTW, should we be talking about it as STEM education? Because really that's what it is. Because I think when to someone that we would talk to on the street, if we asked you, what does Irvington do for technology, they would say PLTW. And I think it's important to realize, well, that's STEM. So yes, technology is a component of that, but it's not essentially that their technology education is STEM, because they're not doing traditional technology education the way you would understand it in a STEM class. So just to kind of highlight what our program is in general, both for PLTW and from a technology perspective. So with the addition of the staff of the K2 PLTW teacher last year, there now is PLTW in grades K through 5. So the way that looks is, that's our launch program, PLTW launch, if we were to kind of do more research on what that is. And each class receives 2 units of study per year. So one is an engineering unit, the other one is a computer science unit. So they are receiving both of those. And then once they go to K5, or once they go to the middle school, in 6th grade, they actually are receiving technology. That's really the closest I would say to what we have is technology instruction, before then moving into the PLTW Gateway program in grades 7 and 8. Now, one question you might be wondering, or that we've often asked ourselves is, well, why would there be a gap in 6th grade? And the reason I would go back to that STEM definition of PLTW, because there are things in technology that we believe students do need to know, such as digital citizenship, important issues in technology that are not covered anywhere else. So 6th grade becomes our opportunity to do that. Now, in addition to those PLTW units that we offer in grade 7 and 8, we have the 8th grade exploratory where we do have 3 other PLTW electives that students can choose to take as well. I think it's important to note, and when you see the slides of what those units are, is the way PLTW has their gateway program, their program for middle school, is it's not like they have PLTW 7th grade and PLTW 8th grade. They have units of study within the gateway program. 2 of those units we selected to be our 7th and 8th grade focus areas because we believe those were of core importance for us to be studying. 3 of those we have as electives for students to be offered. Now, once you go to the, now under PLTW, we do have engineering, that's sequence in the high school, which we'll show you. And we also have our computer science courses as well, which we'll show you on the tables to follow. So just quickly, we wanted to just lay out, because I did mention that we have one engineering unit and one computer science unit, that these are the actual units that they're studying in launch. So we felt it was particularly important to highlight this since we did add kindergarten, grade 1, and grade 2. So in most cases, I'm guessing that you could probably figure out which one's the engineering one, which one's the computer science one. But one that I did want to highlight is under grade 5, because they're the same name essentially. The challenge is the computer science unit. So once they've actually done that engineering background, the automation piece is actually the computer science component, and that challenge is where they participate in that. Now, what we want, the way we laid this out is we laid out middle school on the left-hand side and high school on the right-hand side, just so you can see the program offering. So we have that technology course in the 6th grade. Now the PLTW gateway courses that we require all students to take, that's our design and modeling in grade 7 and our automation and robotics in grade 8. And then the 3 electives that we have as part of the exploratory are green architecture, and then introduced this year were energy and the environment and computer science for innovators and makers. So that's the middle school program. At the high school then, we have our engineering sequence, which is 3 courses. So Introduction to Engineering and Design, Principles of Engineering, and Civil Engineering and Architecture. And then our computer science sequence, which is Computer Programming 1 and 2. And then Computer Science A, which is a course that we've always offered. That's a computer science intensive course, which then ends in the AP exam. And then a course that we introduced this year, which is Computer Science Principles. So that is less programming and more about general foundational concepts in computer science.
You don't have to take the Computer Science for Innovators elective in order to follow, computer science up when you get to the high school.
No, Computer Science for Innovators and Makers is not a prerequisite for, totally. Although, it's like with anything when you're doing computer science, obviously you start to get that coding foundation, which they're already receiving through PLTW. So we're finding that students are actually better prepared for like those intro computer 1, computer 2 courses, because they've already been introduced to coding concepts through the other courses.
Before we move on, with this slide and the prior slide, can you tell us how many of these units or classes existed in 2014?
On the left-hand side?
No, the 2 slides, the K through 5 and this middle school, high school.
Okay, so on this slide, it would only be grades 3 and 4 when we first started. And then on this slide, it would only be...
That was started at that time.
Right, so
that was our first year.
The first year we did it...
14. So 2014, you would have only had...
I want to say it was 2014, 15.
It was 13, 14 budget.
Right.
No, 13, 14, none of this.
No, 13, 14 would be the engineering courses.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so it was just the engineering courses, and actually not all of them. It was only...
Added later.
Right, it was only Principles of Engineering and Civil Engineering.
So I would say you went back to 13, 14, none of this existed.
You go back 1 year earlier.
Right. So, yeah, well, if you go back 1 year earlier, there's no... So last year, there's no K, grade 1, grade 2. It's only the 3 on the bottom. Going back a year before that, it would only be grades 3 and 4. At this slide, the engineering, we had 2 of the 3 engineering courses when we started looking to build this out. If you look over to the left-hand side, that first year we did Project Lead the Way. We had design and modeling and automation and robotics. No changes up until last year when we introduced green architecture as an elective. And then this year was the addition of engineering and the environment and computer science for innovators and makers.
And then in high school, if we were to go back to 13, 14, we only had computer programming?
We had computer programming 1 and 2 and CSA have been around. I taught those classes. So
I started a year too late. If you go back
Right,
a year
right.
earlier, it seems to me you would only have maybe 4 classes out of those 2 slides, right?
Going back to before we actually took on PLTW as a district-wide initiative, we would only have the
6th grade, right? You didn't even have 6th grade?
well, we had technology,
No, we had
6,
technology
7,
6,
8.
7, and 8.
Technology.
But not.
But not PLTW.
Not PLTW.
That's correct. Not automation.
We had
or
robotics,
design.
though.
You had how many computer science classes at that point?
The first 3, but not CSP.
Right.
Okay, so you had 3, okay.
But to be clear, they did not run every year. There were
Correct.
some years that
They didn't.
kids
Okay,
took
because that's
it.
what I remember.
CS
from that year, that there was
so-
only one running.
So at least back then,
2 years ago.
at least back then, programming 1 and 2, because those are half semester. So we should actually note those are semester classes. So that's actually 1 year intro to computer programming would be computer programming 1 and 2. Those were always offered, but it would generally take 2 years to have enough students to be able to run CSA.
So one of the links that I want to make here, and maybe a slide would have been helpful, is to staffing, right? So when you think about this, well, how did we do this? But we have increased our staffing. So when Marcus Oates became full-time, and we moved our study skills program by having the functioning, putting study skills through library. So there have been ways that we have little by little been sort of eking this out. So no, we haven't hired a new technology
Correct.
person, but I shouldn't say that. So last year, we had an elementary teacher now who moved into teaching PLTW. We had a science teacher who was part-time and went to full-time, so she teaches one of the PLTW courses. We had Marcus Oates. So I guess I just want to lay that out for you, that with this has come some additional staffing, it's not always so evident because it's not kind of like right in your face, like, oh, we hired so-and-so. But we've really been eking it out. And one of the things that it actually doesn't matter to our students, but each one of the teachers actually provides credit in different subject areas. So Patsy Costabile is he's under the art department. We have an engineering course taught by a science teacher, so that's technically science credit. And Diana Cassidy teaches several of our courses, and that's math credit. So it's nice, and I share that with you because I wanted you to have some insight into the flexibility we have around this. So for our kids, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't make a difference in our kids' transcripts what this looks like, but it gives us a lot of flexibility in who are the teachers we could be tapping. And we want that range. That benefits us to be able to tap different teachers in different departments. And it really talks to STEAM, and we really exemplify that through that model. So I just
And
wanted
one
to
thing
share
I'll
that.
add, just even as we start to grow that department, it's been really nice to have teachers with different areas of expertise. And this was our first year, so we added, as you mentioned, we added energy and the environment and computer science for innovators and makers. Energy and the environment is taught by a middle school science teacher, and we've now started to meet as a whole department within departments, because we're kind of all in other departments too. But the really nice thing has been able to look at the K-12 Project Lead the Way sequence and start to understand where there are connections across the board and really get a sense of, okay, so, here's what, when students leave my course in Project Lead the Way, here's what they're coming into, or the other way. So here's what my students know by the time they come into the course. Because, they're not getting that. When they're being trained for Project Lead the Way, they're being trained on their particular course that they're going to be teaching. So we're now finding ways to optimize the work we're doing in those courses by having a greater understanding over the work that's being done by each teacher in the course. And it's been really nice, and I think even there's been a lot of wow moments for teachers that have a base in science and are now seeing what some of those connections are through areas that they're not even as familiar with those engineering and math connections as well. So it's been this year in particular, it's really started to feel like with that addition of the K2 teacher, how it's all started to gel really nicely. Now, this slide was taken actually from our 2014-18 technology plan, because I wanted to highlight our thinking in building out that plan. So I remember I talked at the beginning of this presentation about how it was important to provide a flexible plan so that we knew we could pivot, but also we believed it is equally important to provide an accessible plan, because as you guys know, plans live on documents unless you're actually making those connections to people to make it real for them. And technology is one of those things where some teachers, you know, there are always going to be teachers who are like, I don't know technology, I can't do it. But we felt like the thinking behind what we really want teachers to be doing with technology lives in the work we wanted to honor the work that's being done in our classrooms every day. And so in thinking about a way to really meaningfully do that, the work of that summit where we sat with those teachers to make those connections were, what are observable teacher and observable student behaviors that would happen under each of these goal areas? And we particularly picked curriculum integration because we wanted to highlight that what we did was take those observable behaviors and then map them out to the ISTE standards. So the ISTE, for those of you who are not familiar with ISTE, is the International Society for Technology and Education. It's probably the most well-respected and established set of standards around technology use. They've actually expanded them since we did our work to not just having standards for teachers and students, but having standards for coaches, for administrators. They really developed nice sets of standards. But what we did back then was map out these behaviors to the ISTE standards. And you'll notice that the verbiage around the standards, so for example, the standard 2 for teachers was design and develop digital age learning experiences and assessments. That was their old goal 2. Now, one of the great opportunities we have as a result of kind of doing this, creating this new plan for moving forward is that ISTE's actually realigned their standards as well. And if you take a look at what their standards look like, these are much more in line with the work we've been doing all along. So notice, these are in place of that long sentence, where in that sentence they're talking about use of digital tools and really getting specific. Here, these are more like those broader goals that we've been talking about. So if you look under their student standards, they're now talking about global collaborators. We already had global education and citizenship as a goal before we're not saying they copied off us. I don't want to be very clear. I'm not accusing them of anything. But I think it really speaks to, you know, when you look at our existing goals, before we've even gone back and now taken a look at the work we've done over the past 4 years and modified those goals, they've already moved the standards closer to what we were doing around innovation, global education, and citizenship. So now part of the work we will be doing this year is, as we start to reframe those goals, is to now go back and take a look at those behaviors again and realign them to these new teacher standards and student standards that they've come up with. And I want you to look at the teacher standards for a second, because one of the things that I think we really liked about those standards is there's no technology. They're not talking about being a technologist when they talk about those standards. They're talking about teachers as learners, leaders, and citizens. And that's really in line with what we've been doing all along here in our district. So we feel like this will only make this next iteration of the plan even more closely aligned with the work that we've already been doing in the district. I don't know if you want to add anything to this slide.
I think I would just say, I think not only when we look at the student side, the teacher side, that whole idea of designer, I mean, this whole, the whole premise behind what we believe is that for technology to be in the classroom, is your instructional design has to be designed with that purpose and allow for that. So again, that whole analyst, it's the push that we're having toward using data. So those are the words we've been using, and I think it opens the door for it to be extended beyond people who are interested in technology.
So 2 left. We're almost there. 5 out of 7. So goal 6 is innovation. So, you know, innovation is a very broad word. So specifically through this lens, we're talking about innovation and the best practices of technology integration. And what I wanted to do here was just highlight a couple of different things or initiatives we've been engaged in. So I talked before about that student voice-infused classroom. You know, it's important to have a lens that you look at innovation through, and I think for me personally, it's always been, and I feel like a broken record sometimes, so I apologize to Chris and Raina for hearing me say this for the 100th time, but really, for me, it's always been about increasing opportunities for student voice, choice, and agency. So, you know, we talked a little bit about student voice before, choice obviously being a huge component of engaging students in school in general, and agency being that kind of advanced, I'm going to say an advanced version of choice, but really empowering them to have decision-making over the learning experiences that they have in school. And so that can manifest itself in a few different ways. I think one way we've seen it happen at the elementary school is through this idea of Genius Hour. So I mentioned that as part of the work we've been doing at Dow's Lane. It's also happened in pockets at Main Street School. So for those of you not familiar with the idea of Genius Hour, it's essentially like 20% time, but at the elementary level. So if you're not familiar with the idea of 20% time, it's an idea, while not a Google idea, it often gets associated with Google because employees at Google can spend 20% of their time working on an area that is completely unrelated to their area of responsibility. So just a passion project. So some of the things that have come out of 20% time at Google have been Gmail, which started out not as Google's initiative to create a better email system, although I sometimes I wonder whether it's actually better. But that was just a few engineers who were like, you know what, I wonder if we just started from scratch and created an email system, what it could look like. Google Cardboard is another one. Many of those initiatives that have really taken hold and become part of the core business practice of Google have happened as a result of 20% time. So what happens when we look into the classroom now and start to engage students with that idea of passion-based projects? So at Genius Hour, we've seen that when students have been given that ability to have voice and choice over the projects that they're doing, they've been more engaged, more excited, produced results of a much, not a much higher quality, but really allow students to put their stamp on that. Student Innovation Fund has been one way that we've been able to do that with the partnership of the IEF, and if they were here, I would thank them for all the hard work that they've done because they've really spent a lot of hours, in particular Meredith and her team over the past 2 years to really help kind of define systems to help support this work around the Innovation Fund. And I'm sure you've seen many of the examples that have come out of that, but I think the Tiny House being one of them. Sam's evening symposium last spring, which was so. Where do we go forward with that innovation work? I think we're looking for, how do we now start to systematize that through the through some experiences that we have listed up here, and also through our work with flexible learning spaces. Goal 7, that was the one we talked about before, education, citizenship, and really just to kind of frame that for you. How do we use technology to promote engagement in the global society? So these are just some examples, and I really just brought these into 2 categories. The use of specific tools that are focused around geo, so expeditions we already talked about, both the virtual and augmented reality components, as well as things like My Maps, Google Earth, that allow students to not only explore those concepts around global education and citizenship, but really allow them to engage and collaborate on them. And then global connections. We have had classes doing things like mystery hangouts, global read-alouds, which has been going on right now, or even bringing in authors or guests through video conferences and even being able to record those and have those archived for future use.
So this slide and the following slide around next steps, we're sort of going to shift gears from here. So the delivering the vision and some of the next steps speak most specifically really to the integration of technology and the development of the next level of plan. So moving forward, clearly defining our goals and expectations, our future alignment. As Jesse referred to, these new standards have been developed. We want to make sure that those new standards are part of our plan with knowledge, skill, and application. Integration, how we're measuring our growth. Jesse shared our clarity data has really now started to have some traction and really some value for us. And refining and ensuring that our infrastructure is in place to meet the growth. The next steps, somewhat are a reiteration of the slide before, but I also want to point out it's that idea of including our strategies and resource and unit planners. So it's ensuring that the work that we're doing related to technology is also part of our instructional design model. And the whole idea of making sure that teachers are aware of the different resources, what's available to them, and are prepared through professional learning. One of the differences between when we developed the plan the last time was, as Jesse said, we had nothing. We really were starting from scratch. So we would really see this technology plan as going through some revision, but it shouldn't be, in our perception, it shouldn't be this whole big thing. If technology is part of and I hope what you're seeing is it's just part of the living, breathing, day-to-day work here, that we want to continue to grow that. But that grows on a continuum. We're not looking to blow up a plan and create a whole new plan. We're looking to say, where is our plan now? What has changed? So the changing of the standards is a really good example of, well, our plan no longer reflects those standards anymore, so we need to ensure that our plan does. But our goal is not to go through what we went through the last time, but to rather say, here's what we have, here's our foundation, where do we need to grow, and how does our new plan reflect that?
Policies and compliance. So these are just some of the existing structures that we have. So we have, the technology plan that we're developing, some of the policies that are already in place to support the work that we do in the district. But one thing we did want to talk about was data privacy and just discuss, that's obviously something that we've heard from groups that there's not concern about, but just understanding of what our internal processes are around that and what we're doing to ensure that students are working in a safe and secure environment when they're in our district. So this is beyond the network security. This is really about data, and specifically student data, because as you know, we've moved to an environment where most of the products we use now are not things that are installed on a computer. They're services that are out on the internet, and so data travels out of our network in order for that to happen. So one of the big steps we took was to join the RIC 1 Data Privacy and Security Service. So this was actually something that many districts had lobbied for. Every district was essentially repeating the same work of each other. So, we all use certain products, so we're all going to go over these, go through their privacy policies and understand what they were going to do. So the RIC actually, the RIC 1, which is a combination.
For a second.
RIC, Regional Information Center. So our RIC is LYRIC, Lower Hudson Regional Information Center, but there are regional information centers throughout the state. RIC 1 is kind of an umbrella for initiatives that are the RICs in partnership together. So what they've done, one of their biggest initiatives has actually been to create this data privacy and security service, which we joined, which part of the work they do is to actually go through the privacy policies. We can basically request, so this is software that's not in there, go through and pick out the pieces that map out to the Parents' Bill of Rights and kind of tell us what are the things that, what are those key components that they're required to have, how do they address it in the plan, so that districts are not going through and actually doing that on their own. The other piece of the service that's really big for us is something we've been preparing to launch in the next month on the technology webpage is a public portal for those softwares. So in other words, what that public webpage would provide is what software we have in the district, what type of data is there, and when is our contract up with that particular service. So some of them are ongoing, but others have dates that might renew annually, but it's important for parents to understand when that data is no longer being used and what happens with that data. Additionally, we are providing, it's not enough to just provide that in a void. We feel it's important to actually provide additional resources for parents to have and the community to have a better understanding of what are some of those data privacy concerns that are out there. So we're hoping to launch, along with this public webpage for parents, information and resources to kind of educate them on some of the concerns around data privacy. We know it's not something that's just an Irvington thing. This is something that all parents everywhere are really, asking myself as a parent in my own district. The questions I have around, the different types of software that are available for teachers and students, and what data is out there and how that data gets used. So under infrastructure, really what we wanted to do was I'm not going to spend too much time on here giving you the breakdown of hardware and software. It's kind of self-explanatory around the things that we believe fall into those categories. But what I really did want to do was just give you a snapshot into the difference between the last time we did this presentation and now, and how that has changed, the numbers over time, how that's changed, because it's been a pretty big shift. So the last time we were here doing this presentation, we had almost 600 physical desktops in district. You could see that number has actually gone down greatly, with anticipation that there'll actually be further reductions to come with physical desktops. Laptops and iPads have stayed pretty consistent in terms of those numbers, but where we've seen other big shifts, you can see a huge increase in Chromebooks, right? So that number jumped up substantially as a result of really making the shift to those flexible environments. Bless you. And there's not a one-to-one cost involved in that, right? Because a desktop is much more expensive than several Chromebooks, so we're actually able to get more devices for the same price that we were previously paying for one device, which could not be moved around, and thus limited our ability to be flexible within those classroom spaces. Virtualized workstations, very quickly, just to refresh, because some people may not even know those still exist in our district, but the way we ultimately achieved multiple devices previously while still keeping a low cost level was to virtualize one workstation and essentially provide it with a card that we could insert into it that would allow us to have multiple monitors and keyboards coming out of one workstation. Again, you can't move those around. It's essentially, it is where it is. But gradually that technology has found itself to be somewhat obsolete. So we've been phasing those out over time with anticipation that when we receive our next cycle of funds from Smart Schools, we will actually be able to phase out the remaining virtualized workstations that are in district. There's also, and I didn't put the increases in here, but the other two changes since the last time we did this. Before, we were just in a coverage model on campus for the Wi-Fi when we did this previously. We're now at a saturation model, and what that means is a coverage model just means that as I walk through the school, I should be able to keep Wi-Fi on a device. Saturation means that as I start to increase those number of devices that are in a particular area, that the network can support that. Now, when we say saturation, what we mean is saturation based on the number of devices we have now. So as we start to increase devices, it still requires us to increase access points, but for the devices we have now, we currently are in a saturation model on campus. With the Smart Schools funding that we received last year, we were able to install Wi-Fi at both Main Street and Dow's Lane, and we have coverage with anticipation that as we start to grow the number of devices we have in those buildings, we'll move to a saturation model there as well.
Just quickly, so
Sure.
last year, if students were having issues getting onto network here at the high school, that's addressed now?
Well, they could have been for several reasons. One, there were still areas of the campus that did not have Wi-Fi. We actually should now have Wi-Fi in those areas where we didn't. So, for instance, the atrium or some of the areas like the gyms, we actually now ensure that there's Wi-Fi there as well. I had a second thought too, and I just lost my train of thought when you asked about
Bandwidth and access points.
bandwidth. So yeah, actually, bandwidth was where I was going next. So in September, we actually completed upgrades. So we actually tripled our internet, which, believe it or not, may not actually be enough. So we were maxing out our internet every day from the time we walk into school. It would spike to our max. We now increased it from 100 to 300, and we find ourselves in the 175 to 225 range every day. So, we realize that as we start to grow devices, as we start to open up other possibilities for students in terms of what they can do with their devices, that also increases the bandwidth as well. We increased bandwidth from location to location as well, but that we feel like where we are now, that would actually support even further growth, so we're okay on that front too.
Access points?
Increase access points.
The addition of access points.
Right, so that was how we actually moved to saturation. So we actually, in addition to making those bandwidth changes, the way we achieved saturation was actually over the past few weeks. We did it in two phases. We did all the wiring late summer, and then actually did the installation of access points over the past couple of weeks, which is why they actually would be noticing those improvements now as opposed to the beginning of the school year.
Just quickly note, we're also using E-rate money to fund that bandwidth, and we actually got a lower rate through the E-rate program, so that was kind of cool.
Maybe getting a good deal.
So, do you want to talk about this? Or you want me to talk? So this is just, we really just wanted to paint a picture also about our staffing. So I know we talked about, where increases are, or what our technology staffing looks like, not just from on the instructional side, but also as far as the infrastructure department, the technology department, let's say. So we've already kind of covered the teaching and learning as far as where those courses are. Those are the teaching or the staffing numbers that kind of align with that. In terms of my department, my position is listed there, as well as, it's interesting because my position is Director of Technology Innovation, but that CIO piece also refers to all the data stuff. That's not like it's like a little add-on thing. That's its own big portion of the job, which is supported by a 1.0 data analyst. I then have we have the technology clerical support, which is split between athletics and technology because, come on, technology and athletics. It makes so much sense. And then we have our 2.0 EdTech engineers. So those are our 2 full-time engineers who are here through our consulting services, as well as our 2 district employee aides who support some of that work for some of the things like, printer swap outs, things like cartridge swap outs, things like that.
But let's just be clear on what that looks like. So that's one person on this campus.
Right.
And that's one person split between Dow's Lane
Who
and
travels
Main
back and
Street.
forth between the buildings,
The aides.
correct.
And the EduTech are contract versus the others are employees of the district.
That's correct. The 2 technology aides are CSEA.
So when you go back and you think about when Jesse talked about the infrastructure, the number of devices and all the peripherals that are thousands of items across the district, and then all of those courses and experiences that are offered, it's really delivered through such a skeleton of staff. So it's really something where we're stressed, but something to be proud of, to see how creative we've been and how much we're able to accomplish with such limited staffing.
And I would say that actually, if we would have done like over 5 years, the bottom section, that infrastructure, has shifted very insignificantly. So the top, we can talk about how we've been able to eke out these different positions, but at the bottom,
The bottom would have shifted 0.5
yeah.
on the engineers.
So for all the technology, all the additional infrastructure, all of this work that's being accomplished, we have very little support in the infrastructure component. So I think we just wanted to create a summary. I hope that what you heard from Jesse's examples and from some of the specifics that we were able to share, that technology has really shifted in this district over these last few years, certainly since the 2015, is that what you said? 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and the creation of that technology plan. I think that we have been able to support a lot of different entry points, from thinking about curriculum and instruction to thinking about professional development, supporting students, supporting teachers, and the system, because what doesn't really get mentioned here is all of the clerical work, like all the people who sit at their desks all day also need support. So we talk a lot about teaching and learning, but we don't actually talk about the whole level of infrastructure of people who demand and require tons of support on a regular basis appropriately. We've spent a lot of time on the instruction, the integration, professional learning, and expansion. And we're excited. We feel like we were able to share lots of examples of growth. One of the things that I know that I highlight for you very often when our administrators present to you is that when they present, that while you may feel like a pocket, it may feel like one isolated experience, when our principals present to you, they share with you work that is systemic across their buildings. And we purposely do that, even though we're showing you one example. We're saying, but this is what's going on in our classrooms. But I would say with technology, we're actually sharing the opposite.
Right.
I think that there are some areas that we are systemic. Certainly some of our Google work is systemic, but there's also pockets. So really the shift for us now is to say, what are the standards? What is that baseline that we expect across the district? Because I think Jesse and I have talked a lot about, and Chris as well, that it's important. Innovation and creativity comes in pockets. You're not going to implement that across your entire district. You actually want to open doors and give teachers opportunity to dip their toes in a lot of different ways when it comes to technology and tools and resources. But we also should have a baseline. We should have a baseline of what do we believe all students should have? What should all classrooms have? What should all teachers know? And that's the systemic work. And we clearly see that our next level of work is being sure that our systems are in place and that the systemic work that we need to do is defined through the next level of the technology plan. So when we think about the work, and so as you sit here as a Board of Education, and so what does it mean to you? So it's great to be informed, right? You always like to know what's going on and where is our progress and where are we going. So when we talk about technology, we think about what is the relationship between growth and staffing. So that human infrastructure slide is really an important slide for us because we're pushing through, but what is that relationship, and are we where we need to be, or if we're not, what do we need? And I think that that's a really important question as well. How do we balance the needs and growth of hardware and changing technologies? So this idea of like, let's buy, all of this, or let's buy that, or do we buy this for everyone, or do we try this out in a classroom? We've talked a lot about our smart boards. In some classrooms, our smart boards get amazing use, and I think teachers would kill us if we even mentioned getting rid of them. And in some places they're hanging there and they're really just screens on the wall. So how do we ensure that we're thinking about the technologies we need, what teachers need, and how do we shift with changing times, but how do we also hold on to the things that are valuable we've invested not only money in, professional learning in, and they're actually being made use of in the classroom, and we certainly don't want to take that away. And then do Board of Education policies continue to support our technology goals? So Jesse talked about that compliance, the data privacy. While we don't have a ton of parents knocking our door down, I think we have parents who want to know. They want to feel confident that our policies and our approach are supportive of their children and of what we're expecting kids to be doing in classrooms as well. So with that, we have lots of questions that we posed for you as well, and I have a feeling you might have some questions you'd like to pose to us.
Well, I'll start by saying thank you very much. It's, there's a, as you started with the introduction, a broad range of information to be shared, and you shared it, so thank you. Does anybody want to start us off with a question?
Well, I would love to just go back to that last slide because how the presentation was ended. So when I think of the technology plan, my first question is how do you develop the plan? It's the next one, 2018 to 2021. Are you working with the building technology committees to sit down and draft the plan? And if so, are these the kinds of questions you're sitting around and addressing, the ones that you put up on the board here? Or are you suggesting that these are the questions that can't be answered, that we're just going to address as a board as we move forward?
I'm not sure it's an either or. So our next step is to convene a committee who will begin to work on the revision of these goals. Again, because these goals are so steeped in those ISTE standards and the behaviors of what we want to see in our classrooms, in some ways it's a natural evolution. So there are things that we could be defining that aren't necessarily related to these three questions. I think where it moves forward is expansion. So I think in order for us to talk about it, and I think that that's a really good conversation. I know we're going to be having upcoming roundtable with our administrators. So as board members and as community, I don't know, have we reached a point that we feel satisfied? Do we feel that as a district we have a STEM-based curriculum that meets the needs of our district, and we feel set where we are with that right now? I don't know. So for me, that's the bigger question when I think about where are we now. I think while we're confident that we're providing a really important strand of learning for students now, K through 12, I think that we have ongoing questions such as, what is the relationship between our technology standards and units and science with the new next-gen standards? So maybe over time, should we be shifting, and I might have said this last week, 2 weeks ago, should we be shifting to a biomed unit in certain grades? So I think that those are the ongoing questions that we need to wrestle with internally based on what are the standards, what are the expectations for kids. I think that the infrastructure components, I think of this relationship of staffing, I think of the vision for where do we want to see, what do you want for Irvington? I think that that has to be an ongoing conversation. A simple answer, which is a little late for that, I think is they're not mutually exclusive. I think they need to be going on simultaneously. Because even a representative group of people in a room are not truly representative of the whole community, whether that be the school community, the Irvington, parent community. So we want to make sure we're capturing what we think is important. And I hope you feel from the presentation tonight that we've done a pretty good job of that to date. So I think we'd like to build on what we've done and start to ask some of those new questions that are being framed for us by what's going on out in the world, as well as the changing standards and expectations for students, as well as other curricula that we're implementing in other subject areas.
I mean, doesn't the conversation sort of move to different places at different times? So there's a part that's deeply steeped in standards and your professional knowledge, and so that's where the conversation rests at a certain point. But you also, like you were just indicating, there's a connection and relationship with the students and the community and the world out there, and then at a certain point it comes to the board.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that happens, somewhat simultaneously. Some pieces have to happen first in certain venues. We need to be able to come to you and say, here's that vision, that long-range planning. What do we see? And then we need you to say, well, why? What are we doing? How does that meet the goals? How does that go back to our strategic objectives, right? Like, I think that we're in a place where we're making much higher level connections. So I would hope that it feels like we're all talking the same language at this point, which I would say 4 years ago, I don't think was the case at all. So.
Well, I can tell you from my perspective, it was very informative, so thank you very much. And I did read that technology plan when I first got on the board, and I will tell you I would never read it again because it's too detailed. I was just curious what a technology plan was, and it certainly wasn't presented like this. So,
right.
so Yes.
Yeah, no, I remember sitting in the presentation 5 years ago. It was tough.
Yeah, so this
Imagine what it was like to write it.
Yeah, really.
So from a board perspective, yes, this is a great improvement, so thank you for that. I can tell you that my biggest struggle with technology is the concept that we hear over and over again is that teachers have to regularly integrate technology in their classroom. That in and of itself is different than our curriculum. I mean, I hear that, I've heard this in this room before, that's a goal of this district is for our teachers to use technology in the classroom, for our students to use technology. So I understand the difference between the use of technology and the curriculum that is technology, PLTW,
That's right.
the science,
That's right.
our,
Right.
our computer science, our engineering, my daughter's in the high school classes. So the two are separate, and so I've learned over the last few years what the curriculum is involved, but I don't understand how our teachers are using technology in the classroom in each one of our buildings, and what we're doing to support our teachers who aren't teaching the curriculum but are trying to integrate, and we want to support them in using technology. And we want our students, most importantly, to go off to college and be able to be comfortable with this technology that they're going to be using in college, even if they don't take computer science, even if they've never taken a PLTW class, because as we know, those are all electives. I mean, once we passed our mandated middle school class, it's up to our individual students. Not every child is going to opt for that. So that's the piece I sit here, and it's hard as a board member to say, oh, we want to support you, or we want to move in a different direction, or we have to change the staffing, or put more hardware in hands. How much hardware do our teachers in high school use? How often is the technology integrated? Is it outside of science and is it outside of math? Those are the things I still sit here and don't understand.
So I will tell you that in terms of hardware use, I think we've found that the hardware that we've distributed over the past couple of years in terms of the Chromebooks, almost from the minute we distributed them, the question was, well, we need more. I think that the struggle that we have is, you're right, it's in that support, it's in that instructional support. So even whenever we have conversations about, one-to-one and people see me hesitate, it's not a hesitation because I'm necessarily, because it's about getting more devices. It's about how do we support teachers to be able to embed that into their instruction. I think there are some teachers who, if you were to give them a full classroom of devices right now, they would say, oh, great, I know exactly what to do with this. But that's because they either have a proclivity or passion or an understanding of how to do that because they've been doing it. As you said, there are some of those just early adopters who just always have that ability to connect with technology and embed it into instructions on that SAMR ladder in a way that helps them redefine their instruction. But then you have a lot of teachers who would struggle with having a full class set of devices in front of them and know how to embed them. And I'll be honest, when we looked at other school districts and we've been exploring every model we could possibly explore, and when we've seen districts who've gone one-to-one and not provided the instructional support to go along with it, those one-to-one initiatives almost always to a district fail. So I think we're at this really key point this year when we start planning, and we have a series of meetings on not just our normal budget meetings that we always have with technology, but our long-range planning meetings, and just this is a really important moment for us because we're at this point where we've started to provide devices for teachers in a way that they didn't have access to them before, and we're now talking about where do we go from here. I find it hard to have any kind of conversation about where do we go from here that includes additional devices that doesn't include additional instructional support for staff.
How, and this is where I go back to the slide that you
Sure.
entitled, I'm sure intentionally, opportunities for teachers as opposed to anything other than requirements for teachers. How do you provide professional development when it's really just up to the teacher to opt in or not opt in, to attend a summer workshop or not attend a summer workshop? I mean, how are you able to communicate and support the teacher with professional development and other training and education to be able to use devices and technology in the classroom successfully? So
I think there's a, sorry? Oh, okay. It's a good question, and I think you're right. I believe that when there's initiatives where we need to provide professional development, so for instance, when we launched Google Classroom and made it a requirement for all teachers to use it 612, we had professional development of, myself and I worked with staff to develop professional development resources where we then went. I obviously couldn't be everywhere at once, so I was with one set, whereas teachers were with another set delivering that professional development. As I mentioned before, the way we do that Google PD support is there are people available in each building for for that can be scheduled as needed.
But
Now,
that's one aspect, right? That's Google Classroom.
right?
And at this
Or
point-
Google, well, it's broader than Google Classroom, but yes, it's one
And
lens.
At this point, K through
Correct.
12, all our teachers are using it and are supported and informed.
Well, Google, not Google Classroom.
Google Classroom 612, Google, yes. Everyone in district was trained when we made the switch over to G Suite. We did have actual professional development plans for both, Gmail, calendar, the things that we needed teachers to have. We provided required training for it, as well as the additional support moving forward. I think if I'm going to be honest, if I feel like where it's a struggle, I'm me, so I can't do the amount of professional. I think one aspect that I actually would have forgotten to mention entirely had Raina not brought it up is the PD required for our clerical staff as well. That's something which we're still trying to figure out. Okay, well, how do we do that on top of everything else? So no, it's a challenge.
So I would like to flip that back to the question, because I think the answer's and partially right in front of us. Like, if you build the capacity of people to do the work, then you're building your own army.
So David, so that's where my head just went. So I think the piece that you can't see here, and again, if you think about how I brought this to a close, what I said is that we have pockets of some really awesome work. Our systemic work is very difficult when you have one person supporting it. But I want to just say, while we have one person named, what we've seen is the capacity of our teachers grow, and teachers help teachers. Like the conversations you see our teachers having and sharing and saying, oh, I'm doing this. Christine Rosner, Nancy Deacon, Sarah Russ, like our instructional coaches, see that as part of their work as well. So I don't want to make it sound, we don't have a targeted person, and that's riddled with some other pieces. So again, it leads to pockets of work, but we have no way to say to everybody, everyone needs to be doing this, because we have no way to support everyone in doing whatever. When we do define something like Google Classroom, we created a structure. We have people, teachers who are supporting that. So I think you're going right to exactly where we ended the presentation, which is to say, here's what we have, here's what we've done, but there is a limitation to where we are right now, and it is an infrastructure of a human infrastructure issue that we have, more than a hardware infrastructure.
I guess that's where I go back full circle, and then I'll stop to let others go, is that if it's a board conversation, until you come to us to say, we're limited, and we can't, I'm only one person, and I can't go beyond what I've already gone without hiring somebody else. We'll never be in that position, in my opinion, to be able to chime in on it.
So that's why what I said a few minutes ago was that, so our long-range planning, because that's the work we're doing behind the scenes now, so that we're able to say to you, here's what we see, here's what we need and why, and here's what our goals are and what we would hope to accomplish should we be able to move forward in that way. Which is why I said it's not linear. It's really like all these pieces are moving at once. And we hope tonight would give you that foundation so that you could see what we have been able to accomplish.
Yeah, and when we sat back with this, it was amazing just to see how many pieces of things that have come together, how, we've come full circle and all this. The idea of looking at where the ISTE standards have evolved to now being a place where they align with our theories of action, and to think of all of our work related to strategic objectives, strategic plan. But now in the process that we're renewing this plan, we're engaged in long-range planning. You've heard Raina and Jesse both mention, we have a series of meetings set up with everybody throughout this fall that are going to inform those types of presentations in and around needs that are going to happen. So it's there's a tremendous amount of synergy that's coming together in and around this that's driven and focused on the future. So, that last slide was very deliberate in kind of framing future conversations that we're going to be having. So, when we talk about long-range planning in December, when we have a roundtable in January, when we talk budget, all of those things are built from one to the other. So yeah, I think your question is great. The one thing that I want to say is that we talk about pockets in that. Raina made reference to that idea that, there's the dialogue that we want to have about what needs to be, that K-12 system, right? And those kinds of expectations that you have. But we don't want to be lost is the art and craft of teaching. Right? So when we talk about standards, when you talk about programs and all the old Common Core debates, that magic that the teacher brings to the classroom is going to be lost. This is still another one of those spaces where teachers express their individuality and their passion and make connections with kids that we don't want to take away as well. We want teachers to run and have those wonderful pockets that are going to be enriching and exciting.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
It was a very rich presentation. I echo what Michael said before. It was really a great presentation. So thank you very much for the thought and effort that you put into it. First question will be around, you kind of said it already, Deb. I'm going to just extrapolate out, and it is not really to be answered at this particular moment, but I just want to put it on the table. Because I heard very clearly, without it being said directly, is that we're going to be asked for another position very soon in the budget talks coming up, right? I mean, that's what I heard. And I see why, and I get it. Personally, and I know that we've addressed this as a board in other facets, but I really believe that we need to see a professional development plan, because I know we've asked for one. We have no concept of what the PD is, where it's going. Like, I just, like, can we please see a professional development plan? Is the first question. You don't have to answer it now, at another time.
I don't want to be difficult, but I think we've had conversations in and around them, and that's one of our processes this year is redoing it.
I mean, I gave you a kind of I'm not sure even it's the curriculum and instruction plan. It's not a professional development plan, it's the curriculum instruction plan with the PD related.
Well, we received a document last year which was shared. If you have ideas about whether there's some facet in which you would like to see it different, I think that's a discussion.
Well, because I asked because when I see that 70% combined, and I know the data's flawed in the discussion before, or
I wouldn't say flawed.
Or whatever the word you
right,
use.
okay.
It's
Has limitations.
For lack of a better word, it's empty, right? Because it's not telling us anything other than the fact that there's 70%, well, I mean, we can go to the slides, there's 70%, where are they? 32% of teachers use have computer use in instruction almost daily. 38%, 38% use it weekly. Okay. So that to me says that 70% of teachers are using computers throughout a weekly basis, correct?
Okay.
Is that
I agree with that.
Is that fair?
Yep.
Right? So my question is, and maybe again, you can't answer this now, but so how many teachers is that? At what levels are they? The reason I'm asking is because if we're going to look at, you know, how to expand it, right, to your points, and fully want to support that, knowing how it's being used and when it's being used and what's being happening, just in some kind of report at some point, it's really important. And this gives us a scratch on the surface of that, I guess. But, you know, to what affect is it even being used? Like, so if teacher A was developed on using Google Classroom with me at the same time, but Beth is using it to, you know, send emails back and forth, but I'm using it to create editing on papers and doing, I mean, like, is there a way to figure that out? And is there some kind of systematized expectations?
I think couple thoughts quickly. One, the couple of the examples you gave there were more of the not in instruction, but for technology use. So for instance, emailing, I wouldn't necessarily say that would be a use for instructional purposes. And that's really why when I pointed this slide out, I wanted to frame it as this was actually for use in instruction, not just technology being used in the classroom. I think the word I used before was that the data doesn't correlate exactly, so I wouldn't even say that it has flaws or that it's not useful. What I would say is, as an instrument, so what you're seeing here is the data for the district. Clearly, we can break down this data by building, but again, what we don't see is the one-to-one correlation. This is the instrument itself, and where we don't see the correlation of the question that was being answered to how that maps out. So like, what gave us this answer was the result of several questions that were asked on the survey that were then weighted and corresponded to this particular answer. So there, I think Raina and Chris said it best before, which is there's a lot of data there to unpack, and we're fortunate enough that we're at this point where we have longitudinal data to be able to look at, so we're not looking at things in isolation. So yeah, I think we specifically were mindful of choosing one snapshot right now to really talk about, because we could have just talked about, this could have been just like a data presentation essentially. So that would have reduced the focus from it being about the work we've actually done over the past few years in technology and where we're going.
I just want to build on that just to say the purpose of showing this slide was to show growth.
Right.
It wasn't, it's not specific,
And growth is noted.
it's to show growth. That was the whole purpose of
Growth
it.
is noted, but it's more loaded than that. Just, I'm sure I'm not the only one at the table who feels that way. Thank you for mentioning, I use the word silos instead of pockets, but and I know we're growing, so I'm looking forward to see where that growth takes us, because it does seem to live in silos at the moment. I think the term that I used was it's experiences versus true integration. It feels like, but I know we're on our way to really fully integrating in classrooms, so it's a very exciting time. And I guess the last question is, how is technology integrated into the arts, or is it yet? Like, I know we have excellent art teachers. Are they using Wacom tablets? Are they getting involved with Photoshop in different places and things like that? Is that part
We
of
have photography courses that use Adobe Photoshop. So like technology is being used across the curriculum.
It is.
And I guess to answer your question about when you were like, well, which teachers? Again, this was issued to all teachers K-12 and grades 3-12 students and parents. So that data is broken up that way.
I had a question, well, sort of a comment. First of all, I'm so happy to hear about the SAMRA model, which, we've had explained to us so much because it helps to build that with the teachers, to build on their integration of the technology. But I wanted to go back to the K-1 unit because that was interesting to me. You were talking about like using certain levels of Chromebooks, I guess touch Chromebooks versus iPads. And, there's been some research recently that for the littlest learners, the iPads may provide a more mobile experience, a more artistic experience. It sort of builds on to one of David's questions about the arts. And I'm wondering how that plays out in the PLTW idea, with the animals and algorithms and animated storytelling and grids and games. It would be nice to know how that's fleshing out because that is a kind of new program.
We're 6 weeks in.
Oh, okay.
K2, so I'm curious about that myself. I think we've been in the classroom. Go ahead. You want to?
What I wanted to say was, so the PLTW room actually has dedicated iPads, which were not a choice for us. PLTW actually required us to have iPads for that program in particular. The one thing I would add, just as you start to think about a touchscreen Chromebook, because I think people think of them as like, it looks like this. But actually, the touchscreen Chromebooks fold back so that they actually function as a Android tablet as opposed to an iPad. So yeah, so all the functionality you would have on an iPad essentially would be available on a touchscreen Chromebook with the added ability to actually unfold it so that there's a full keyboard there.
Although at that age, the keyboard.
Right, which is why.
But they're being shared around also.
But they can be shared then.
But exactly.
But they're not for that. For PLTW,
Correct.
they're dedicated.
Right. So PLTW iPads are dedicated for that room. They don't leave that room.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing when we talked about the work we're doing with K-1 to identify the right device, yes, they may not be using the keyboard functionality, but remember, there's still that component to where, there's still devices being used interchangeably. So I think it's been interesting to kind of go down that path with each of those grades because who finds what works for one teacher doesn't always work for another teacher. So we're still kind of working through, as we start to make informed purchasing decisions, are we getting the right devices putting the right devices in the hands of students?
To build on that question, so I would be remiss if I didn't identify the fact that in the middle school community there have been
Sure.
not one-to-one in the class sense. Everybody in the middle school should have something, but that's certainly for members of the community, the question has been raised, should the smartphone be used in the classroom versus the Chromebook for security reasons, for data privacy reasons, and also for conduct reasons, yeah? So where are we headed on that, if anywhere?
So brief, 2-second history lesson, just when we introduced BYOD into the district, we were just starting to kind of get the Wi-Fi network up, just starting to increase our number of devices. I think really, what we viewed the BYOD initiative as was a way to also support what teachers were looking to do in the classroom but didn't yet have the capacity to do with devices. So teachers who were designing instruction knew that if they wanted to have students take out their own devices, they could allow it for instructional purposes with, of course, the understanding that they've designed instruction to maximize that idea. BYOD was never intended as to give students the freedom to feel like they can take out their phone whenever they want to be able to do whatever they want. It was only supposed to be used as a way for them to use it for instructional purposes. So yeah, I've had conversations with several parents who've said that a student either did something they weren't supposed to be doing, or and I think this is important to really note, that they were, and I'll give an example, watching Netflix or something like that. Well, here's the thing. In order to part of the BYOD policy states that students, in order to use their device in a classroom setting, need to be connected to the BYOD network in order to do that. They sign in using their credentials, which gives them access to our network, but specifically through the websites and apps that we filter to allow them to use the same as we would on any of our devices. Now, we were very clear when we first rolled that policy out that it was not on the teacher to have to police and go to every single device. So if they were saying students could use a device for instructional purposes, they've designed instruction or allowing students to use a device. It's not on the teacher to have to go check every single device to ensure that the student is on the BYOD network. That expectation would be crazy because the teacher would spend their entire period going around checking. So for those cases where we have found out about that, I mean, it's a violation of the policy. They're not supposed to be using those devices. Now, where do we go moving forward? I think that's still a question to be determined, because the initial reason for using BYOD was to supplement the fact that we didn't have enough devices to support instruction. I think it's a possible answer now, because we still have to have those long-range planning and budget meetings. If, for instance, we were to say at a particular grade level we were going one-to-one, well then yeah, there wouldn't be a need for BYOD in those rooms because every student would have a device.
But it would seem to me that if you have a class in which based on what you were talking about, the tubs and the carts, that if you had a classroom subject in which the teacher was often to say, everybody use their device now, that classroom would be one in which there were a sufficient number of Chromebooks for that class. So we know from reports that that's not always the case. So I would just hope, and I'm just saying this,
Sure.
that moving forward to the 2018 and forward technology plan, that the reality, yes, I was there at those 2013 meetings, and BYOD was what everybody was hot about. But when we see, implementation, you learn things, lessons come up that you may not have otherwise. In the middle school context, it appears that those lessons are coming up on a rather regular basis.
I think there's two pieces to this, though. I think that, even when we started with the BYOD, it was riddled with things. People, kids using different devices, their own. So I think that we always felt that, ideally, it would be better if we were just supplying the devices, right? I think, because then we know it's a consistent set of devices. The teacher doesn't have to worry who has this phone, who has that phone, who has this device. So I think that we knew that. I think we've grown, right? So from those years, in terms of limitations.
Absolutely.
So I think that, I don't think we're far off in terms of what we all kind of believe, because really, who needs a kid bringing in their own phone into a classroom? Honestly, how is that really a good plan? But the question, I think, still goes back to then, so do we have 30, do we have 20 devices in every classroom so every kid can take a Chromebook when they walk in, or a device? Do we have kids walking around with their own device? So I think those are the questions we're looking at now. And that's why I was saying, like, Amplify gives us one way to actually really connect it deeply to a non-negotiable curriculum. In order to deliver this curriculum, we need to have those devices. So I think it's going to give us a window in to what's the difference between where do we have to have them and where is it more based on the teacher's instructional design, which is, Deb, I feel like where you were going. Where is it optional and where do you have to have it? And that's exactly where we're perched right now. Like, we're so ready and have been starting to have those conversations. And
I think this comes back to us saying, we're at that really pivotal moment in time, because I think right now, if we were to take away BYOD from teachers here, I think that would be a major issue, because, and this, I'm going to sound like Raina right now, but I think it comes down to instructional design. If the lesson or activity is designed correctly and appropriately, then students won't be off task in what they're doing, because whatever they have their device out to do is actually something they're going to have to be engaged in at the moment. Ultimately, it comes down to, our expectations are that if students are engaged in a BYOD activity, that they're following the code of conduct and the expectation of the BYOD policy. Are there times where that doesn't happen? Yeah. I'd also say there are times where students are supposed to be writing something and they'd be scribbling or doodling on paper. So there's no perfect solution, even if we were to furnish, say again?
A good analogy.
Even if we were to provide every student with a device. If a student wants to be off task, a student's going to be off task. We need to ensure that we're helping teachers to be able to develop lessons and, and design their instruction to maximize the use of technology effectively so that it does engage students throughout the lesson.
Now, when you say that, though, that's going to be integrated into unit planners, does that work with them?
I'll come back.
Yeah, so I think a really good example that Jesse referred to before was the summer workshop, so where Holly came. So again, Holly talks to teachers and supports teachers in integrating technologies into their curriculum. And so one of the great marryings of this has been that we were sitting at tables with teachers, and it was the three of us. So Holly's talking about these tools, and I'm talking about where in your planner is this going to go, right? And it's exactly, which is why I'm saying Holly's coming to take teaching thinking with us, because that's the connection. So yes, it has started, and we need to teachers need to figure out, where does it make sense? We don't want teachers using technology for technology's sake. That's not the point. The point is giving teachers a strong enough set of tools that they can pick and choose and make sense of the curriculum through these resources. And so I don't know that we'll ever be able to say all teachers will use Flipgrid. I don't know that we want to say all teachers will use Flipgrid.
It's funny you said that. So I would actually say that I wouldn't want a teacher in their unit planner to write, going to use Flipgrid to do this. What they're doing is writing what the instructional outcome is, and it just so happens that we have tools available for them to support the work that's already outlined in the unit planner.
But isn't that the art of teaching?
It is, but it's stage 3 of the unit planner, though. I want to be careful here. The art of teaching lives in stage 3 of the planner. It's not out there in space. If you're designing, you're naming your student outcomes and you're naming how you're going to assess for it, stage 3 should reflect the art. How are you getting there? What are you using? What are your resources? How are you grouping kids? What strategies are you using? So it's not in the air, it's in stage 3.
But my point is it varies from teacher to teacher.
That's right.
And that's what I mean by the art of teaching.
Absolutely.
Because Raina Cord can use, certain, you're probably not going to agree with this.
Only because the only thing that the reason, and I hear that a lot, is that if as educators, those who are designing, like who are actually saying this is where we're headed and this is what we have to have our students prepared for. If every teacher says it's not the art of my teaching to integrate technology in some way or another, is that okay?
No, and I guess.
And again, I always go to the high school levels because I'm not talking about when we use technology in the curriculum classes designed around science and technology. I'm talking about English
general classes,
global history. I mean, if we have teachers who just don't want to integrate, it's not part of the unit planner. That's okay. Is that what we're saying?
Can I tack onto that?
The art of teaching?
But it's
I don't think I'm going to say that right here and now.
But it's tied to the curriculum.
I just want to be on the same page.
But it's tied to the curriculum. That's really important, isn't it? Because if I'm studying social studies and most of our children, whether we want to agree or disagree or like it or not, receive their media and their news through either Twitter, whatever social media they're getting it from, or text from somebody else. That's where they're getting their news from. And right now we're in a climate that's being completely abused by the professionals up above. And if our social studies teachers, whether they like technology or dislike technology, they need to be tuned into that only because your vision and the goals speak to a rigorous education. And if we're not teaching our kids to sort through electronic sources and recognize misinformation and those kinds of things, and they're in a social studies class with a teacher that just doesn't do that, that's a problem. I'm not, it's not a question, I'm just emphasizing the point. Yeah. But it's a real problem elsewhere in many places.
Laura?
Not to bring things from a very interesting discussion and a much higher level down to very kind of day-to-day things, but just you talk about developing the plan and revisiting the plan through this next iteration. Is that going to be done with a group of teachers as the prior one was? So does that basically just include faculty?
Yes, it's a.
Sure. I just wanted to say, so I think when we talked about how we did it last time and bringing together 100 teachers, I think you have to also realize when we did that, we didn't have a plan. We had nothing. So it was important to get as much stakeholder input as possible into that process. I think now we have a plan that we believe has actually led us to a really good place, and that with revision can help move us forward. Want to speak?
Yeah, Yeah,
I don't
well,
know.
yeah, because I want to say, like, so I think that what we want to make sure we're doing in this next round is we have some incredibly talented teachers who love technology and who have done some incredible things. And we have some very talented teachers who aren't using technology yet, but it's not because they don't want to. They just haven't figured out yet how to make it fit or what would work, or maybe we haven't introduced the right tool yet. So I think we want to make sure that we're addressing and engaging all of those teachers, right? Because otherwise you just end up with the tech-loving teachers, and that's great because they have a way of thinking that often is a little bit different. But if we really ultimately want to support all teachers, we need to make sure those voices are, both voices are in the room.
So what are the next steps? When what are
Soon.
you envisioning? Like a committee of 20-some-odd teachers across the district, and this is going to be revised by X date? Like, what is the plan?
I feel like she actually just basically
Yeah.
said what, that's actually like
That's
around
funny.
pretty much what it, so we've identified dates that we're just working with now the administrative team to ensure. What we'd like is participation from teachers who've already been engaged in the building committee work throughout each building, so we have representation from each building, both administration and teachers, and we could start to then work on. Now, I don't view the entire work needs to be done by the entire group, so I think when it comes to, like, for instance, realigning the goals with the ISTE standards, that's not something that necessarily it requires the work of the whole group. But yeah, so there will be the larger group and then some work that then happens outside of the larger group.
And ideally, when, do you have an ideal date when this is going to be done by? Or?
Spring.
Spring.
I think April, what did we say? April
April.
1st?
I think April was, yeah, we said April.
Jesse, two other questions quickly I have.
Sure.
Too, is, do we have makerspace in our buildings? You hear a lot about, you read about makerspace.
We do. It happens in different forms, I guess I would say. So like in
Space with all the
not quite like that. So not, it's so funny, the term makerspace gets thrown around, and I think one thing we learned actually through the site visits, and this was really interesting, when we came back, I was with the group that went to Scarsdale, and actually we were just fortunate enough that when we went, we were able to see 4 schools in that one visit in a couple of hours because they were close together. And every school's iteration of a makerspace was completely different. So there is no real like formal, do you have this, and it looks the same in every school. Every school kind of defines it in a different way. To where I've even seen make writing spaces, where it's a makerspace, but a makerspace for writing, with no physical, tangible, hands-on tools. So we've really been exploring that through the idea of flexible learning spaces, not through necessarily having the tools available, although in some, like at Dow's Lane, for instance, in their new 3rd grade, in the space that's in the 3rd grade hallway, they do have some of those tools available or resources to be able to check out and kind of use. And even in some classrooms, they have their own maker spaces. So yeah, we do have that. I think
And
again,
you have the Makerspace Club that Kate LaLear does.
that's right, in the library. So
In the library.
they're available, and it's also, again, I think some of that work I would talk about in pockets.
And lastly, coding, there used to be a coding class. There was a lot of talk of that a couple of years ago before in the morning. Is that still something that?
So we actually replaced the coding class that was happening at the middle school with one of the electives. So that was how we were able to add that second elective without changing the staffing number. So what we did was just simply shift that computer programming 1, so that semester-long computer programming 1 class, we were making available at the middle school. And actually one kind of unintended consequence that we noticed was it actually impacted I said we offered AP CS every other year. It created a weird little gap for some students who took CS early. So it actually helped us to kind of bring that back to the high school and actually add that computer science for makers and innovators as a placeholder at the middle school. Because that actually, as we started to look, interestingly enough, at what was offered through that PLTW elective, it aligned really nicely with some of the work we're trying to do, not just at computer science in the high school, but as we talk about those opportunities for innovation, it just meshed really nicely. There was a second part of something you
That was
asked.
just whether that class was still being offered in the morning. The
Okay.
answer is no. Okay.
I have a funding question that's related to this. I'm not really sure, so it should be a brief answer. I know in New York City, you can't fund devices as a capital expense. Is that true for the entire state under the comptroller's rules? No. It was either under smart schools or nothing, basically.
Buy them and supply your supply code.
Yeah, no, I know, as an operating expense, but you cannot do it as capital expense. Okay, thank you.
I have one one more question as well on, so the Assistive Technology Committee, who comprises that committee?
So right now, myself, both the director, assistant director of PPS, and we have several teachers who are on that as well.
I'm assuming
with those
special ed teachers?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, because before there was some confusion. I believe this is the document that you were referring to when it talked about PD plan?
I didn't say PD plan, I said the curriculum and instruction plan.
Right.
So
I
the
just-
PD supports the curriculum and
I just want to
instructions.
clarify what I'm suggesting, so because I think there's a miscommunication. When I say PD plan, what I'm talking about is Wednesday, 11:13, I'm just making numbers up, right? Wednesday, 11:13 is a pull day where we're doing professional development. This is what the plan is for that specific day. Next month, what's the plan for that day? Next month, what's the plan for that day? So that, like, if there's a PD plan stream, like, it could be multiple streams, right? But if there's a PD around technology, as we head into budget season, it would be nice to see, like, how we're developing teachers or building that capacity that we agreed on before is a really key way to not only, to build the program, to move it from the pockets, right? So that's what I meant by
Okay.
that, not
Understood.
I have two questions, one for Rena, one for Jesse. First of all, I love this presentation, especially reviewing the prior one and what that looked like and what this looked like, and this is version 10.0. This is great, so thank you. Amplify, when you were talking about Amplify earlier in the presentation, Rena, you said that this was this is what struck me when you were speaking about it, one-to-one model, you were excited about it, it was the future. Why? Why is this one-to-one model, science?
I didn't mean it is the future. It tells us if it's like, so that's what we're going to be able to tell from this. We're going to be able to say, I think it overlaps in two areas. What technology should we have in our classrooms? Well, if we have a curriculum that demands a one-to-one, then that will maybe dictate what we actually need in our classrooms. It also would dictate that if I'm a science teacher and Amplify is part of our science curriculum, then I need to be using Amplify, and I need to know how to use Amplify, and I need to know how to use those devices. So that's what I meant. It's going to give us a window into the future. I don't know if it's our future or not.
So in other words, if it's a good program, because you're piloting, right?
Exactly.
And if it works, then that means it's giving you an indicator in the future.
Gives us a window into, right.
Okay.
And the other thing that I would say to you is that there are other subject areas that it doesn't even exist, like a curriculum even designed to do this. So I don't think it's the future. Everything's going to be this way. I hope not. But it gives us a window into what are our needs. So that was really what I meant.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then on slide 20, you talked about, well, let me go to it real quick. There was three things, hold on. Productivity, collaboration, and assessment. And Jesse, you were talking about, you used the example when you were teaching the use of index cards and you couldn't look at them in time for the next period. And you talked about exit tickets, immediate feedback.
Right.
I mean, I thought exit tickets, in the various presentations over the years, to me, it sounded exactly like what you spoke about, index cards, like sheets of paper that the kids turned in at the end of class. So, but you made a comment how it gave the teacher immediate feedback. So now I'm thinking I've misunderstood maybe prior presentations, but how are these giving the teachers, give me an example of, if it's not the exit tickets, what are we doing in the classroom, I guess is really my question, which I'm assuming involves technology, that's giving the teachers that immediate feedback to build upon for like the instruction for the next period.
So under the assessment slide, I had a couple of different other software or, products that we use, Quizlet or Kahoot. They all have like a different kind of spin to them right? So some of them are game-based, and Kahoot, I'm sure, is something that has been, while I haven't been in every presentation here, I'm sure that's something that was mentioned because I know it's been used before, kind of a gamified version of doing that type of thing. What I was working with teachers on was really more of how do I get that raw data? So for me, because they were using like Flubaroo or it could even be done right in Google Forms, it's a simple just Google form, 3 multiple choice questions. They put the link up or in classroom. Students open it on a device, whether it's their own device or on a Chromebook. They simply take the 3 questions, hit submit. But between the time the bell rings, a teacher can literally walk over to the spreadsheet, run the analytics on it, where students would receive an email before they get to their next class with those results, as well as the teacher not only seeing those individual teacher scores, but having that data question by question showing me, just at a broad glance, here were the areas where students struggled on the whole. So to me, it's more of like some of the things that have been done with, what do you call remember we used to do, we had
Student response system.
So we had like the
Student
whole student
response
response,
systems.
the student, like we had the clickers. Like
Yeah.
This is the presentation from like 10 years ago, where we had the student
Yeah.
response system clickers, which let me know in the moment, like, oh, okay, great. X number of kids knew this. As soon as they walk out of the room, I had no data then to go back and actually reference or look at any of that stuff. But now we have this, we're empowered in a way where we can let students know before they even reach their next class whether or not they have to come back and seek me for extra help before they get home, because students in the moment always believe they have a grasp of it, but then when they're on their own at home and then starting to work on whatever work they have for the class, they can't, if they realize at 8, 9 o'clock, or whenever they're doing the work that they needed help is not there. If we're giving them that feedback in real time, they know that they can have the opportunity to seek out a teacher during the day in order to have that. Additionally, I think it's even more powerful to have that data as a teacher between periods 1 and 2, because now I can make that adjustment to my instruction based on the feedback that I'm seeing. So I just delivered that lesson. If I see that concepts 1 and 2 were not understood by the class, I mean, to a teacher, 5 minutes has to be an eternity, because there's like 20 things that need to get done in the middle between period 1 and 2 to set the stage. But at least now they have that opportunity to use that data to inform their thinking about how they're delivering that lesson.
Okay, and then one follow-up question based on what you just said.
Sure.
So you used the example earlier of Flipgrid, and you used it you gave the example of a math lesson,
Sure.
a student modeling a math lesson.
Sure.
Are those Flipgrids available to the rest of this class to watch later on? Like that evening, like if they're doing their homework, I'm envisioning like a math class at Main Street.
Absolutely. And I would actually add that, like, in many cases, they're available in the moment. So teachers, particularly at Main Street, I've seen this, have actually encouraged students to go back in and actually leave feedback for other students. That's been one of the big value adds of that, is it's not just happening out in space. They can see how many I don't know if you've experienced this with your own kids, but when they it's weird now when we post things on social media, my kids are like, how many likes did that get? How many, that's like there's an actual currency to that, right? So students can actually see within their own classroom environment how many views they get. Students are liking things and also saying, hey, I really liked your poem because, and they're able to get that feedback to support their work they're doing within that product.
Right, I'm just thinking of parents not knowing what the kid is doing, their child is being able to help them with their homework, for example. If a kid models a math problem and student B goes home and kind of like, oh, I don't know this, do they have that access?
In a weird way, right.
To me, I would say that feels more like flipped classroom, like where the teachers provide that instruction that kids can, are doing at home.
No, I'm just talking about if a kid made a Flipgrid.
Right.
Does another student have the ability to watch it at home to make sure that
Oh,
they're
absolutely.
doing their homework?
And I would also add that, I would also add that a big
These
component.
concepts are past when my kids were there, so I don't.
I'd also add, just because we were talking about the data privacy piece before, when Microsoft purchased Flipgrid, they actually sent out an email where they required every grid to start off as being locked, and then teachers can choose whether or not to unlock it to ensure that there was no just information out there.
Just so you're aware, some of your teachers get the parents to use Flipgrid also with their kids, and we leave them messages the next day, and it's the coolest thing in the world.
Really cool.
Simple, but cool as can be.
Brian's been waiting patiently.
I
know.
I feel like I looked at him like 20 minutes ago
I know.
and he was about to say something, right?
So one piece of technology that I didn't see talked about was 3D printers. Is that something that we think is something that we want to explore? And
We have them.
Okay.
Great examples at the science fair every year.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna
You know,
say,
it's funny,
science fair is great.
but I think that really speaks to, I think a few years ago, it was like, we couldn't wait to like talk about the 3D printer that was being used in like one classroom, and like we really wanted to show examples, but I think that's really, that speaks a lot, actually, the fact that we didn't talk about it, to the growth we've really had across the board with the work we've done in classrooms.
I also think it speaks to what's relevant and where it belongs.
Right.
Like, in other words, so we're not putting 3D printers everywhere. They're where they exactly should be. So we're happy to say, yes, we have those.
And I take it, we think they're well utilized and we have enough and something for the plan, I guess.
Yeah.
Is going back to the data question, which everyone's been talking about, I want to maybe frame it a little differently. So we have, figure about 30% of the teachers who are using technology monthly or less. And I guess, do we know if it's certain subjects that are less inclined to use technology, certain grades, or is it also, there are just certain things that we don't think are appropriate necessarily for regular technology instruction, so there's always going to be some baseline number of low use? I guess that's the question.
I think one thing I would say for sure is that when we start to unpack this data collection, that we could realistically expect that number to decrease, because as I mentioned, the fall 2017 collection actually came before we rolled out the devices that we had received through the last budget cycle, and that was where like most of the tubs went out to the elementary schools. So keep in mind, at fall 2017, they were just getting the Wi-Fi and just getting those devices. So I think we can realistically expect that that number would decrease. But I think you're right, though, that that's one of the things as we start to look at this data now longitudinally over time. Where are those areas where we need to focus our attention? Because, like you said, not just also celebrating the fact that of what we've achieved, but also where are those need areas that we still need to make improvements.
No, and again, it does show very nice growth. So, and that's helpful. It's just something that I was thinking about as I was looking at it. I think I had other questions 20 minutes ago, which I've now forgotten. So.
I wanted to say about the flip grids, one of the other purposes of flip grids I think is important, and then that links to the question I'm going to ask, is it prepares the children to do certain kinds of presentations that they're expected to do in post-high school work. Like, for example, you do your actual presentation and submit it to your professor orally. So I was just wondering, when we look at these data pieces about the use of computer use in instruction, I can see a class where, example, in social studies, for example, there might not be a need to actually use it in instruction, but I'm wondering at the other level of the students in the high school level using another level of technology where they get used to the sort of models that they're expected to use when they leave for college, and they need to submit things online under certain deadlines and look for things online to know what their duties are and their responsibilities. I see it in the middle school, actually, but I'm wondering, certainly I would think that across the grade, that's not asking someone to use it in the art instruction. That's sort of imbuing your secondary school with a practice that the students can use when they move on to college, if they do go to college. So I was wondering if that exists on a regular basis.
I mean, I think as we start to look at what we have, it's funny. We took a look at what we have as far as the technology curriculum at the high school. I think that would fall back into the conversation that we were having, Deb, we were talking about before about technology curriculum versus the technology skills that we would want to see taught, or that right now get taught in classrooms but aren't formally articulated. So I think that, as we start to look at if this is something we want and value, then we have to start to have the conversation about, well, then how do we actually build that in? Because, again, we're kind of between a rock and a hard place to some degree as far as, if we're not adding a course and we're not adding personnel, where does that happen? So I think we've started to take a look at those. Well, what are those things that we want students? And I think it's part of this planning process. What are the things we value as a district, as educators? What are the things we believe students need to know from a skills perspective, from technology, and where does that happen? And if it needs to happen in a formal course or structure, okay, then how do we make that happen?
So interesting, something that just popped into my head based on your question is, the one thing, and I am totally a believer in the idea that, teachers, the art of teaching, certain teachers might use technology in certain ways and other teachers might not find a value, might not use it in that way. But what I do see as kind of something that's missing at the high school level is that teachers are not consistent, and this is just a very simple thing, not consistent with work being handed in using a computer. So in other words, lab reports don't have to be typed up. As an example, some teachers do require it, other teachers don't. Some teachers will accept a paper handwritten, other teachers won't. And the one thing is, you know, the majority of our students are going off to college, whether some teachers use turnitin.com or not. In college, everything is submitted electronically. So while we don't have to accept things electronically, at minimum, kids should be required to hand in their finished work typed up. At least I would think consistently across the board, because that is where you're going. That's just a common.
And I would just say, like, it feels like what will surface, which really did surface initially when Jesse shared with you the work at the building level. I don't know where that was. But I think that's a high school conversation, right? So I also think that we need to separate out what is technology, what is the technology conversation, and what is the high school conversation or the middle school conversation. So I think when Jesse Wade, a few hours ago, shared this slide with you that showed you where we went initially after the development of the first plan, like you can see, like everybody was focused on number one, which was the device part. So I think you're right, and I think that's a reasonable evolution you're highlighting. That's important for us. Right. But it seems like that would be the work that Jesse would be working with at the building level. What is important at Dow's? What is important at Main Street? What is important at middle? And what is important at high school? Right. And that's where I would believe that should serve.
And I just had that thought when
I
was talking about certain skills.
No, it's important. It's a skill.
Right.
Yeah.
I have another question, which has to do with the demand for additional STEM offerings in the high school, and where that comes from, and if we are at a point where the classes that are offered are completely full, max to capacity, or if that's still building. Mm-hmm. And then I guess sort of as more of a long-range question, and looking at what's the right level of both class offerings and staffing for that. Does having every child coming through K, all of elementary, doing Project Lead the Way necessarily increase the demand when you get to those higher grades?
It does.
Two pieces.
So we're seeing that. We're seeing increased interest in enrollment in our high school classes. But I would say really where the answer to that is going to come is in our long-range planning, because we're right there with you, really to examine and to understand where are we, where have we come to, what growth have we seen already because we have had grade 3, 4, and 5 now for several years, but those kids haven't hit the high school yet, or right? So I think, but our kids who had PLTW in the middle school have hit the high school, and there's no question we have seen increased interest. So we'll share that data with you as part of our long-range planning.
Thank you.
I have a question or two, but does anyone from our audience have a question related to the presentation?
Surprise, I'm Erin Bernstein. I'm the parent of a 3rd grader. And I have a couple of questions. Just the one in terms of sort of going off of what Deb said, and thank you, Jesse. This was a great presentation. It was really helpful, and I now know what BYOD is because I've tried to connect to the internet, and I'm like, what is that? But my question is, in terms of, we've talked about consistency amongst like the K through 5 classrooms and ensuring like that foundations is being taught in all the grades. So how does that apply to technology in the classroom? And like Dave just shared, our kids are in the same class. Like, we've used Flipgrid, and I was talking to another parent about Smash Math, and I got Class Dojo, and I could go on about all the technology that I've been exposed to, but I don't know if that's happening in all the classes. And is there a concern or a desire to have that consistency amongst all the classrooms? And what impediments does that cause? Like, if this class is going to 4th grade now and the other kids don't have that same background?
So I think that's a question that we've been, discussing for a long time now. So for years we had an established like K-8 standard around what, I think there's an equity around technology that's available in a classroom, and that's why I still believe we kind of ensure that yes, no fourth grader should feel like their classroom has more technology available to them than another fourth grade classroom. I think in terms of the integration, that's a little bit of a different story, right? So Flipgrid's, I think, a perfect example because, you know, some teachers use it, gravitated towards it, and they're using it in their instruction. That doesn't mean necessarily we view that every teacher. I think that's where the art comes in a little bit is some teachers are going to use different tools or find a different way to accomplish the same thing, and I think that's okay. I don't think there's ever, you know, besides, I think where you see that equity happening, or not that equity, but that requirement of use of like a tool across the board is really for more of that like productivity type stuff, or, you know, for something like a Google Classroom where we're talking about ensuring that there's consistency around delivery of resources and content. That to me felt right even as we started to have those classrooms at the middle school and high school level. So I think there's the equity in terms of technology that's available. I think we do value that and think that's important. I think Raina also highlighted something really important where, you know what, maybe that applies to devices, but not necessarily to things like those like smart boards or peripherals or things like that, and that's something we're still working through as we go forward in that planning process. But as far as the resources, I would say that that's not so much where we're like, every teacher has to be using this, that really they're figuring out the best way to deliver that instruction for their students.
But can I just add something to what Jesse just said? But having said that, I think the example of, Flipgrid, Christine Rosner has probably shown every teacher how to use Flipgrid. Right. So I don't want to make it sound like it's just this teachers on their own, that we are exposing teachers. Where they go with it is the challenge, but we are providing the tools and the knowledge of the tools to all the third grade teachers, or to all the, and different paths.
Just to tie into that, my question is, would the unit planning and the discussions between teachers at the grade level and between grade levels wouldn't that be part of the conversation that, you know, we're trying to teach these standards, here's how I'm doing it, here's how I'm doing it, and when it gets to from 4th to 5th grade, is that working out in terms of that transition?
Yep. So there's no question those conversations have always happened, right? I mean, and now the more people are using technology. You know, I also just want to highlight that I think that there are certain things that, and I think this has just always been true. Sometimes your child is in one classroom and this is what it is, and and it's fabulous, and the classroom next door has something else that's fabulous. I think where we are right now is figuring out what needs to be fabulous across the board. Where does fabulous have to happen, and where is it okay to let fabulous go? And that's, I think, the next level of work.
Yeah, that was very well said.
Fabulous is a technology word?
No, that was really well said.
What needs to be fabulous across
Stay tuned for the plan. It's
gonna
gonna have fabulous all over.
I don't think there's a book in
Like
there.
schools, right? Like in one room this is happening, and another one this is happening, and sometimes that.
Yeah, I mean, we were in a classroom last year where STEM wasn't integrated necessarily with technology, but it was integrated with chess and other more manipulative type of items. So
Exactly.
it wasn't using, there's merit to that. I love that. I love all of it. And there's no right answer, probably. Right? So my next question, though, is how
I'm
much...
just gonna ask that be your
absolutely.
your last question as well, just so we can.
Can I ask two more?
Okay.
I didn't... My last
She's
question...
the only one.
I know, but we're
Sorry.
all here till 11:15.
Okay. Yeah, real thanks. Exactly. How much time are the kids spending on devices, do we think? So we saw the slide that says 70% of them are exposed to it during instruction, at least on a weekly basis. How many, I mean, it's probably impossible to quantify, but I'm thinking as a parent, like I'm trying to limit the amount of hours and minutes that my kid has media. That includes TV, that includes a device. Some of it's productive and educational, but now it's happening at school. It doesn't make it bad, but like, how many hours are they in front of a screen that, like, or minutes? Or
I mean, I would say.
I would say I don't think we could quantify it.
No.
We don't
Okay.
track it or measure in any way.
Is there any concern, though, as we start to push the use of technology with instruction, that it's going to grow to a number that maybe we don't?
I mean, for me, no. Not at the elementary, anyway. I don't know. I have to think longer on 612. But at the elementary school, I think our teachers are very steeped in some of the traditional practices, and they use the technology to enhance and engage. But I don't know, based on what you've said, I don't worry that I'm walking into classrooms all the time and I'm like, oh my God, like.
No, I mean,
Yeah. It's also short. Today I was in a third grade classroom, actually. Teacher was doing learning stations. So kids were for 20 minutes or so, kids were doing an activity using the Chromebooks, but.
Like, so even, for instance, even with the quote-unquote technology or STEM classes, I can't even remember a time where I've walked into the engineering classes and they're on devices. Like, they spend most of their time actually hands-on building, doing, engaged. Now, if I walk into the computer programming class and they're not on devices, that feels weird to me, right? So I think, right, so.
I actually realized I have two questions, because one thing you said just sparked something. When you talked about Flipgrid and like analogizing that to the number of likes, are kids, in an era where kids are exposed to social media and feeling now bullied maybe in school or bullied then once they're on social media, how does that type of feedback affect them? Like if one kid's getting 20 likes and one's getting none, how do you normalize that? How do you teach kids about that? Like, how is that all integrated into the classroom?
It's funny. So after we rolled that out, I actually did talk to a couple teachers about just like, how does that work out as far as like the like components? And they again, I'm not sure whether they asked every student in the class, but they said that in general it was a very positive experience as far as what kids were experiencing. Again, there's no like dislike button or negative feedback. It's not a system that's similar to some social media platforms where there is a kind of a way to give negative feedback. It's actually a system that's kind of built on providing positive feedback and reinforcement.
So we haven't seen, is that something we're thinking about though, just long term as kids are using media and devices more now? Like how, we have mindfulness and character building in the elementary school, and how are we gonna translate that now to a digital age and to all the social media? Okay.
We're thinking about right? I mean,
yeah,
right, that's what happens. Because we have those structures in place, Erin, we're thinking about it all. Because that's what we take the structures we have, and then we filter in what's going on in our schools that feeds and requires that level of conversation.
And I gotta say,
absolutely.
And it's such a reminder, Erin, it's just like how overwhelming the responsibilities of schools are. So like you step back and you think about every single angle, and we get away from like, you mentioned, the continuity of, foundations and earlier, but here we are like 20,000 leagues away, and we're still talking about all that we try to wrap into, 7.25 hours every day. And when we say the overwhelming nature of the responsibilities that a teacher has, and that administrators in partnership with the teachers have to corral, organize, and, to say what it's gonna be systematic, what's gonna be, glorious or whatever Raina said in
fabulous.
Pockets. Fabulous.
Fabulous.
Pockets. But where do you fit in that? Jesse referenced digital citizenship, right? So there's a piece of that fits into curriculum already. But yeah, it's embedded. You try to fit it in everything you do.
No, I know there's no perfect world. I'm just throwing it out there. I'll just make it a comment instead of a question. But as we talked about being global
citizens?
No, and educators. I think we took it out of we took out global citizens, I thought, from the strategic plan, but for Main Street School global educators, I'm hoping that can include a component with language. And I'll end on that note. Oh, and thank you to the board for all that you do.
We were waiting for it, Erin.
Well done. Nicely done.
And
Well done, well played.
Mic drop.
My final comment is, I think it should be highlighted. Slide number 41, can you put that up there?
I don't know what 41 is.
Figure out
Can
which
you
one
tell me what
41
it is?
is.
I don't know what 41 is.
Infrastructure on
human
slide.
infrastructure.
And I just want to say and really point out where we were back in 2014, where we are now with so little human bodies doing it all. And Jesse, I mean, I know you're the lover of comics and Comic-Con and all that. Maybe
Still
secretly you're a little, Superman behind the scenes. But I just want to say, I think it should be said, is this district is in a whole nother place. Honestly, thinking back to that technology presentation back in the day, never envisioned where we are now, but I also didn't envision Instagram and all that stuff either. But regardless, knowing who pulled this off, I mean, kudos, fantastic.
We have an amazing administrative team, and they've all been really amazing partners in helping us to get where we are. Yes, it's one person up there, but that's why we started off by showing the work that's happened at all the building levels, and even at the district level when we start to do the budget planning process and it's the people sitting here at this table that really sit with me and help us craft that long-term vision for what we're doing. So, yeah, I've been very fortunate to have some good partners.
And I guess the piece I just want to add on, because it really doesn't play out anywhere in here, but the amount of time that certain things take of Jesse's time, so when I think about the rollout of the new website, like the fact that anything else got done while we're rolling out that website is a miracle. But those kinds of projects, they take over. Work around our student information system. Like, there is all of this behind-the-scenes stuff that doesn't play out in a technology presentation, but that demands and pulls on Jesse's time and all of our time, to be honest with you, our building administrators' time. So I think it's just worth noting, so through all of this, we've also, been able to roll out the new website and through tons of Jesse's leadership around that as well.
Thank you. I do have.
Michael didn't get a chance to ask his question.
No, it's not so much questions as takeaways or foreman as questions. But, coming out of this, I think for policy, there's at some point the idea that we may see on a policy level the BYOD and how that's, and there may be other aspects. I think, coming out of, I was just looking at the district goals and hearing what we're hearing today, I think we could, as a board, use some clarity around the process that you're going to have for your faculty committee, what touch points there are with students and community, and what touch points and buy-in and eventual approval by the board, if that can sort of be laid out for us so we see those parallel tracks and where they intersect. And then one point that this conversation today shifted for me, and that has been touched on by other trustees and even your two recent comments is, last year if you'd asked me what we need for support, if we're adding someone to this list is someone to support K5, K8 in terms of really if you're in ELA, if you're doing math, if you're doing other things that where you're not getting the specialized training of PLTW or other classes, to really work with them. But what I heard today, and I know you have to wrestle with it far more deeply and intricately than what I'm putting out there today. But when you make those reference points to our instructional coaches, you mentioned just now, Christine Rosner, maybe that's the approach. Maybe in terms of their support in learning and integrating it in terms of the work that they're doing with instructors seems like just hearing what you're saying, a powerful way to approach it, rather than having a separate, siloed person doing this. So, thank you. And with that, we will.
Nice job, Jesse.
Thank you.
Let's
move on. Brian, did you ever remember your question? Or? Okay. All right. That would have been the way to.
So, you're going to move on to consent agenda. Could I get a motion to accept our consent agenda?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
So Brian and Maria. We are approving, among other things,
Was that your dinner?
I just trip to Spain,
Yeah, because
our winter coaching positions, some personnel items, and items related to extracurricular. So, are there any questions before I call for vote?
Kudos to the Spanish department for the trip.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
A lot of cities.
I want to go. It was so awesome.
All in favor?
Aye.
I don't know if there's any, it's listed as a discussion item with these resolutions for the NYSBA. It turns out that I'm available to go to the business meeting as a delegate. So do I have your approval to be the designee for?
Thank you, Jesse.
Where is it?
It's at the NYSBA convention in
The city
on Saturday morning. I get to go there at 7 a.m.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard.
Do you designate me to go do that?
Yes.
Cast your votes in favor.
With deep blessing. I have to be there the following week anyway.
All right.
Thank you.
So I want to again thank everyone for giving us a little thanks earlier today. That was much appreciated.
Right, always walks out scratching.
And next meeting is November 6th at 7:30 in the campus presentation room. And we will adjourn our meeting.